Kume229 here, and this video was supposed to come out almost a year ago. But hey, better late than never. This video is going to be covering a lot of things in 2022 that I actually really enjoyed. Different games, movies, and TV shows that I was watching or rewatching, replaying, that, you know what, I kind of wanted to talk about. Because, you know, it's stuff that I really enjoyed in that year. So before we get into this, I want to make sure I thank my channel members who have been supporting me. Thank you very much. If you want to check out my channel memberships, you can check out down below. You can get emojis in the chat, get previews on upcoming videos, and even get the uncut versions of videos I had to edit down to get around copyright. And if you want to check out my Patreon or my Subscribestar, you can check out either of those for pretty much the same benefits for as low as $1 a month. So this video is going to be split into 3 different sections. One on video games, one on TV shows, and one about movies. Just to keep it all nice and organized. So first off, let's talk about video games in 2022 that I really enjoyed. The first video game that I want to talk about is a game that was a highlight of 2022.
I'm here, reaching far across these new frontiers. With my life, I fight this fear. In my hands, I hold the ones I love. Walk forward through the cold tide. Always to new horizons.
Sonic Frontiers is a game that surprised a lot of people. Now, I was excited. I like Sonic games. And I've never been on the, Sonic was never good, or Sonic had a rough transition to 3D. I've never been like that. I've always liked the Sonic games. I mean, sure, the games aren't perfect, but I think a lot of people in the fandom were way overcritical of them. But Frontiers was something different. It was a game that was trying to do something that a lot of people were actually really interested in for a very long time. I mean, how many times have you seen those Sonic in the Unreal Engine? It's just a big wide field where he's running around and people are like, oh my gosh, Sega needs to make a game like this. And Frontiers is that game. You've got these big open areas where you can run around. And while this is an experiment, this is the first time they've ever actually tried something like this, they did a pretty good job. Now, sure, they can clean up some of the mechanics, there's different stuff that they can add, you can definitely refine some of the fighting mechanics, but goodness gracious, for their first try in this new open zone, it's not, they're not calling it open world because it's, you know, these different islands and, you know, those are the open areas you run around in. But for their first try, they did a pretty good job. But something that stuck out to me personally was the story. Now, they got Ian Flynn, who's a really popular Sonic comic writer, to come in and help write the story. Now, if I remember correctly, I think Sega kind of had the basic gist of the story anyway, and Ian Flynn kind of came in there and took that idea and fleshed it out. But what Sonic Frontiers did is something that the games have not done in a very long time. Actually acknowledging continuity.
Look, it's an assault model Death Egg robot. It looks pretty entrenched.
But together you stopped the Ark, overcame Neo-Metal.
Ages ago, my people were wiped out by a cataclysm. It reminds me I'm the last Echidna.
I'll be back before you can do a fortune card reading. See ya!
Now, a lot of people are like, continuity in Sonic? Some people will laugh because a lot of games in the last, really, like, decade haven't really had very much continuity. And even a game like Unleashed, which I know a lot of people liked, wasn't really, like, fit into the continuity because old Sonic games used to have a pretty solid line of continuity. You had the old classic games, and you moved into Sonic Adventure 2, and you had Sonic Heroes, and even Shadow the Hedgehog in 06. As mixed as Shadow the Hedgehog can be, and there are good points to it, there's just a lot of...
This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
And as awful as Sonic 06 is, there is an understandable line of continuity. Now, Sonic 06, being such an absolute disaster, made Sega change stuff. And it's after that that they stopped having this sense of continuity, because you look at it, especially in Sonic Adventure, there's this bigger story, an elaboration on lore, a lot of exploration of this stuff. Sonic Adventure 2 expanded on a lot of the characters' histories. Hell, when you're introduced to Gerald Robotnik, oh wow, relatives of Dr. Robotnik, and you had Maria, and you had the stuff with Shadow, and you had all this stuff that's expanding on the lore. And while Sonic Heroes wasn't really like expanding the lore, Shadow the Hedgehog did try to expand the lore. To mixed results in some ways, but it was trying to do that. And Sonic 06 was trying to have a big, elaborate story. It was a bad story, and that game was rushed as all hell, but they were trying to have a big story. And after this, you start to see that the game stopped feeling like they're building up on stuff. Because even Sonic 06 was, like, especially with Shadow's character, and Shadow's character might be the best part of 06. It feels like there's a lot of stuff that was built up over Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog. It felt like it was actually building up in something. And after this, they just kind of stopped that. Now, the games had stories, don't get me wrong, but you look at something like Lost World and Unleashed and Colors, and they didn't really connect. And Sega was very clearly trying to maintain a lack of that direct continuity, probably because they took the exact wrong lessons from 06's failure. With Forces, it felt like Forces was the first time that it was like trying to acknowledge continuity, and it felt weird at the time because wait. Sonic Adventure and Lost World and Colors and all these games like are connected? They're not like super disconnected? It felt weird at the time, but Frontiers, and you're getting back to Frontiers because there's so much to talk about in terms of the Sonic fandom lore. Sonic Frontiers was the first time it actually felt like, hey, we're acknowledging these games. And it's funny when I see people try to complain, because it's freaking near universally loved. It's so good. Even with any jank or any issues, Sonic Frontiers was so good that even a lot of people who had been bashing Sonic for years came around on it. They enjoyed Frontiers. It felt like for the first time they were trying to tell an earnest story that was expanding the lore. It's freaking the first time in a long time, really, that they tried to do something like, hey, here's new information about the Chaos Emerald that we never knew. It's actually interesting. It's like, hey, there's more expansion on the lore. And I don't want to get into this, and I don't want to like spoil the story, but it actually was really cool seeing that. And having all of these past games referenced. I've seen people try to complain that they reference continuity, which usually comes from the fact that they see like a 2-minute compilation of the different references to other characters and other games and other places in other games, and then saying, all this game does is just throw references 24/7. And it's like, yeah, those 2 minutes are spread out over like a 20-hour game. You only get them every once in a while. And even in my playthrough, I didn't even get half of those that I saw in that compilation. But it's nice. And it's really interesting when they're like, hey, there's this big threat that we're trying to say, alright, we need a sense of scale. Let's reference Dark Gaia.
Whatever assaulted the island sure packed a punch. That was on par with Dark Gaia easy.
Oh, yeah, it's like Dark Gaia level. Oh, well, yeah, okay, so I know what they're talking about now. And then they would reference stuff from past games. And hell, even probably the most contentious part of Forces, the part where Tails, who shouldn't be a coward, just cowers in fear after Sonic is defeated. They actually address that. And Ian Flynn, oh my gosh, took that moment and turned it into character development, where even Tails brings it up and actually feels ashamed that he had that moment of weakness. And hell, they even bring up, hey, remember what you did in Sonic Adventure?
It's like how I couldn't handle it after Infinite attacked. One wrong turn and I fall apart. Whenever there's a crisis, I'm either running away or standing on the sidelines. You're always rescuing me when all I do is follow you around.
Hey, who was it who stopped Eggman from blowing up Station Square, huh? And who broke me out of prison, or saved me from the Deadly Six's trap?
Oh my gosh! They're actually acknowledging this stuff. This is freaking cool! And it really gives me hope for the series going forward, that they're going to start taking this stuff more seriously. Like, Forces was a bit of an awkward step in this direction, but this is solidifying it. Like, yeah, we're going to acknowledge our continuity. We're not just going to be super disconnected. Now, of course, I can't talk about Sonic without talking about the music. And of course, the music in Sonic Frontiers is good. The music in Sonic is always good. Even in the games that aren't good, they still have good music. Look, even Sonic 06, as bad as that game is, has a banger soundtrack.
In this world, life's an open book. In this
So of course Frontiers has great music. Now it's not exactly what you would really expect from Sonic at first, because when you're on the islands and you're running around, you're exploring, and it's a little like Breath of the Wild in a way, where, you know, when you're running around Hyrule in Breath of the Wild, you don't always have like distinctive music, a lot of ambient sound, a lot of background music, nothing really that grabs out. It doesn't always like hit you really hard like the traditional Hyrule Field theme. But then sometimes, you know, you'll have a lot of that music coming in, you know, when you're in certain places. And then you have certain music. But with Sonic Frontiers, you have a lot of that low-key music. But during a certain moment, the music hits hard. In the cyberspace levels, you got some good music. But what really comes out and blows your socks off is the music for the Titan fights. All of them are bangers. And they come out hard with the first one, because you've been going through this first island. You know, you've had a lot of low-key music, and you go into the cyberspace levels, and you get some more upbeat music, and then you go in to fight Giganto, and then
I'm hanging on to the other side. I won't give up till the end of me.
now this is the moment that pretty much everyone went, oh, this is gonna be good. And I really think it's the lack of more bombastic music and keeping it really low-key for a lot of times that makes those moments hit harder. Because you go from this really calm thing and you have this big, huge, bombastic boss fight, and you have this crazy music that's blasting, and you're going supersonic. You're having a supersonic boss fight as your first fight, and it's crazy. Sonic Team knew what they were doing when they were getting people hyped. Like, yeah, it's fun to run around and actually get to go out and explore these bigger areas. But then they know, alright, we gotta have some good boss fights. And while boss fights haven't always been the strong suit of the Sonic series, I think they really did a good job here. There is a lot of spectacle with it. And it's not like they're all really hard. Like, you know, you have one, particularly Knight, which is one of the latter bosses. Yeah, it's a little tougher, but overall, it's not like super hard, but it's fun. Right? It's fun to play, and they really did a good job with Supersonic in this. And Supersonic is normally saved for like the very end of the game, because that's always going to be the big moment of, oh, you go Supersonic and fight the final boss. And it's like, no, like, you have to go Supersonic for all these bosses. And that's the thing with these boss fights. They're fun. I enjoyed playing all of them, even though the final boss was actually kind of easy. It does feel like there was supposed to be a lot more going on. But, you know, Sonic Team struggled to even get the delays they got to finish the game. So, I'm not going to be complaining too much about that. All of the boss fights are fun to play. All of them have fantastic music. And it's crazy, right? You know, and I've already talked about this. But Sonic Frontiers really did do a lot to shake things up. And it really did a lot to really turn Sonic around, at least in the general public's mind. Because as much as I love Sonic, there's a lot of people who have always been really negative. And there are still some people who want to be negative about Sonic Frontiers. It's not really a whole lot, to be honest. There are some people who do feel like they're trying to be negative because it almost feels weird that you have a Sonic game that's pretty much near unanimously loved, and it still is, despite the fact that you'll have people on Twitter complaining about it. No, Sonic Frontiers is great. It's flawed, of course, right? There are things they can improve, and the team has made it very clear that they've listened to feedback. We don't know what is going to be affected in Sonic Frontiers in like the final update. We don't know exactly what's going to come in that. But hey, we know at the very least they're going to take this stuff that they've been hearing about Sonic Frontiers and they're going to apply that to the next game. And I really can't wait to see that. Now this next one is, I mean, technically it's something in 2022 that's new. It's the Switch port of Nier Automata. Now, I've been interested in Nier Automata ever since it came out, and I even remember I was kind of even peeking around online and trying to find like the older Nier games to sort of like get into it. I never really committed to getting into it. There's so many games in my backlog. I mean, freaking, I have a whole stack of Switch games I need to get to. But when they announced the End of Yora edition for the Switch, I was like, And it was only $40 too, so I was like, ah. So I got the game and I started playing it. I haven't completed the whole game. I did the first route, the Route A, and I was playing through like Route B. I haven't gotten through like C, E, F, G. I don't know how many endings there are, but like I haven't gotten through it all. But from what I have played, I love Nier Automata. It is such a freaking fun game to play, and it runs really well on the Switch, which makes me wonder, Square Enix, why haven't you made native ports of the Kingdom Hearts games for the Switch? But Nier Automata, I mean, I don't know the full story, right? I haven't completed all of it. I know there's a lot you have to do to complete the story, but from what I have played, I'm really intrigued about what's going on. And because the game is so fun to play, and I really loved when I started Route B, and you start playing as 9S, and you start playing things from his perspective. I'm like, oh, that's actually really cool. Especially because he has a different play style. I mean, granted, I don't want to like spoil any of the stuff that I did see, because honestly, playing this game, it's like a post apocalypse, or you're seeing like after humanity has basically been wiped out, and you have all these androids running around fighting against the evil robot army. But it is such a satisfying game to play, and all the praise I had heard about its gameplay, absolutely deserved. I freaking love playing Nier Automata, and I am so glad I actually picked up the End of Yora edition, and now that I'm talking about it, man, I really want to get back to it and actually finish the game. I don't really have too much to talk about with Nier, especially trying to avoid spoilers, because I actually went into the game pretty much completely blind, and I don't know what the story is at all. So I'm learning everything fresh with no spoilers, which is really, really great. But now I need to get back to actually finishing it. Oh, the next one is actually something I really want to talk about.
This day on, the Belmont clan will hunt the night!
So last year, me and Angel Ren were going through the Castlevania games, like almost all of them. Mainly it's the Metroidvania ones. We did check out some of the older ones, like Rondo of Blood, though. I tried playing Rondo of Blood, and I got, I think, halfway through the second level, and I'm like, this is rough. Let's just watch a playthrough. But I did go through, and we were playing through games like Symphony of the Night, Harmony of Dissonance, even the 3D games like Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness. I played through the DS ones like Aria and Dawn of Sorrow, Order of Ecclesia, A Portrait of Ruin. Played through all those, and it's funny because I initially got into Castlevania through the Netflix show, and it got to a point, especially in season 3, where I checked out. Like it reached a point where it was like, okay, this show's not good anymore. But it really got me to look into the games. I looked into the games. I watched some videos, like going over like the history of Castlevania and stuff. But I had never actually played them, and actually playing them through in 2022 is really interesting because those games are so freaking fun. Like I obviously I'm a Metroid fan. I still have my Metroid Dread box there, but you know, playing through the Castlevania games, which added the Vania part of Metroidvania, and it's just so good, and especially seeing the different mechanics in them, because you play something like Symphony of the Night, and you compare that to Aria of Sorrow, and then you compare that to Order of Ecclesia, and you compare it to Portrait of Ruin, and they all have these different mechanics, and they take place in these different time periods with different characters, and it's like, freaking, I love all these games so much. It's a shame that they stopped. Though actually playing through the games, particularly Curse of Darkness, which I actually really like Curse of Darkness, it also soured some of my opinions on even parts that I originally liked of the Netflix show. Yeah, I started to realize that Hector in the show, even in season 2, he's not as cool as Hector from the games, because Hector in the games is this, like, absolute Chad. Fantastic character. I mean, it's still like season 1 of the Netflix show, but I want to talk about the games, because I love the games. I look at these games that came out like 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I'm thinking, I know about these games. I had friends that played them, but I never actually played them. It's like everyone knows Castlevania, but man, I regret not getting into the series earlier, but I'm glad I did now because I got to play a whole bunch of really good games. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is a game made by Igarashi, you know, the guy who's behind a lot of the Metroidvania, Castlevania games. And it's a spiritual successor to Castlevania in many ways. And it feels a lot like playing those Castlevania games. Of course, it's got different lore, different characters and the stuff, but the DNA is all still there, and it frankly nails it. For being a game that was originally crowdfunded, it turned out to be a huge success, and I really liked it. Going through it, it felt like playing another Castlevania game, and especially a 2.5D one made in the modern times after Konami stopped making those new Metroidvania Castlevania games. It was great. There are even the 2 spin-off games, and this is actually interesting. The 2 spin-off games are actually done in the style of closer to, say, Castlevania 3, where you've got multiple playable characters and you can rotate through them. I think Bloodstained Curse of the Moon started off as like a prequel, but it eventually morphed into like an alternate universe, because it includes the characters from Ritual of the Night, but in a totally different context. Everything that happens in Curse of the Moon is very different than anything that happened in Ritual of the Night, which is interesting. Just trying to do an alternate take. And then Curse of the Moon 2, which is still done in that retro Castlevania 3 style, but incorporating new characters and stuff, is a totally different universe from even Curse of the Moon 1. So we actually have 3 different versions of Bloodstained. Ritual of the Night, Curse of the Moon, and Curse of the Moon 2 are all different and tell different stories. And I imagine, because I know they're making another Ritual of the Night game, it's been in development, but I have a strong feeling that when Ritual of the Night 2 comes out, it'll be a different story, and I'm honestly kind of excited about that. Because what Castlevania would always do is it'd always have these characters in different time periods, so each of these stories were separated by at least decades, if not hundreds of years. And you can look at all these different stories from set in 1940s, set in like the 1300s, or the 1500s, or the 1800s, and it's actually all really cool. What Bloodstained seems to be doing, and I honestly, if they keep doing this going forward, I would actually really be interested, is they're taking the concept of the same story sort of happening in different times, but instead of having it happen of, say, oh, Dracula keeps coming back in each time period, it's saying, here are similar story beats and similar concepts and similar lore, but we're going to have like a multiverse, basically, of all these different versions where you have like Miriam, the main character of Ritual of the Night, and Zangetsu is a character in Ritual of the Night and main character in Curse of the Moon, and you have all the supporting cast come in and all the new characters that are introduced in like Curse of the Moon 2. And you can sort of remix it and have all these different stories take place where different stuff happens. Characters have different allegiances, different even personalities. And honestly, I really wish them all the luck going forward, because Bloodstained was one of those games when I got to it. Because, you kind of wonder, is it really going to live up to the hype of, oh, this is going to be a new Metroidvania from Iga? And I think it lived up to it. I mean, there's a few hiccups, especially some technical hiccups I saw, but I'm not going to be hypercritical about a few, slowdowns in a few areas, because overall the game ran really well on the Nintendo Switch. And I'm really looking forward to the next Bloodstained game. I actually really like the characters, though I will say Ritual of the Night did feel a little underwhelming in some cases. But I honestly think that even Iga and the other developers probably felt the same way. Because with Curse of the Moon 2, you have different stuff happening and more expansive stuff happening too. Especially in Curse of the Moon 2. Curse of the Moon 2 has a far more expansive cast, backstories, characters, and all this stuff. Even though it's a retro style game, so it's not like... a lot of the stuff is limited to the text box, but there's a lot that goes on in it. It feels like they're experimenting with reiteration rather than trying to say, okay, this story happened, but then we're going to set another story 100 years ago with a different protagonist. Like, oh, let's keep the same group, but let's tell a different story and tell a story that, does more. It's really interesting. And I really love how Bloodstained is so obviously inspired by Castlevania. Everything about how it's structured, the platforming, the enemies, leveling up, with equipment that you put on, the different weapons you have. You have all these stuff that are the similar, but it also has a lot of evolution. There's a weapon that's basically the Chrysogram from Symphony of the Night, but it's a little different weapon, and you actually have to work harder to craft a stronger version to basically be the Chrysogram from Symphony of the Night, which is totally overpowered weapon. I grinded until I got that in Symphony of the Night, and it basically just made the rest of the game a breeze. But there's a lot of enhancements over the typical Metroidvania formula, where, hey, you can have these different, gear and weapons and spells and stuff equipped, but you can also you can earn different slots that you can have presets. Now, I don't agree with having it where you have to, unlock them. I think that having a bunch of different presets that you can select from should just be available. But having some of those presets was great, because there are certain weapons that I like using against certain enemies, certain special abilities that work better in certain parts. And instead of having to go into the menu each time and constantly shuffle everything around, you can actually say, oh, I want a preset for this. And then, okay, I have another preset that I have this ability, so I can change to that and say, okay, I have this weapon equipped, boom, change it to that weapon very quickly. There are a lot of features like that in Ritual of the Night that feel like it's not just trying to be a Castlevania game, but it's trying to move it forward. Like if they were making another Castlevania game, these are things that I would imagine they would put in that game. And I like how it's not just resting on its laurels. It's not just a copy and paste of like Symphony of the Night, or even a later one like Dawn of Sorrow or Order of Ecclesia. It is its own thing, and it does have some of its own gameplay mechanics, especially with like the shards you get and all the stuff you can do with the shards, like combining them and building new abilities and stuff. It felt like a very complete game in terms of gameplay. It was overall a really good package, and for a game that started off being crowdfunded, that's phenomenal. I know I keep saying this, but I really can't wait for the next Bloodstained game.
No one said you could touch.
Let's dance, boys!
Angel and I played a lot of games in 2022, and a couple of the games we played was Bayonetta 1 and 2. Again, we've played them both multiple times. I still haven't gotten around to playing Bayonetta 3. I have such a huge backlog. I've literally just a stack of games, just of Switch games that I need to finish playing here. And my camera is actually sitting on a stack of Switch games that I also need to finish. Bayonetta is a very, very fun series. It definitely carries a lot of that Devil May Cry DNA, which of course, Hideki Kamiya makes it. So of course it does. He's the guy who created Devil May Cry. But it's funny because I can go back and I can replay Bayonetta 1 and 2 all the time. I remember back when I originally played Bayonetta 2, especially Bayonetta 2, I replayed through levels of that game so often, I had to bump it up to very hard mode just to have even any kind of challenge. That's how much I was playing it. And I don't usually replay games all that much, but I was really liking Bayonetta 2. And it's really interesting with the games because you wouldn't really expect it, but Bayonetta 1 and 2 have some interesting stories. And it's interesting because when you look at Bayonetta 1, you see a lot of stuff that's introduced, right? You have certain characters, the antagonists, and the angels and demons and stuff, and all that stuff. And of course they introduce Bayonetta, who is drop-dead gorgeous. And then you play through that, and then you go into Bayonetta 2, and Bayonetta 2 recontextualizes pretty much everything from the first game, and then you're like, dang. Like, Bayonetta 2's story is shockingly good. It's weird, it's goofy, and it's over the top, which you should expect. It's from Platinum Games. But along with having some top-notch gameplay, which I already talked about that with Nier Automata, also made by Platinum Games, but the Bayonetta games have some interesting stories and very likable characters. And the cast isn't usually too big, and as the story, marches on, certain characters like Enzo's usually just there for some comic relief in the beginning and end. It's mainly like Bayonetta, Rodin, Jean, and Luca. They're like the main characters that you'll get to see, so it's only a handful. And in the second game, you got Loki is introduced. But Bayonetta 2 really surprised me. And even replaying it, it's just a fun experience to go through. Now, I don't really want to actually spoil the stories, especially in Bayonetta 2. But suffice to say, Bayonetta 2 actually has a rather solid story. So yeah, go play Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2, and I'll have to play Bayonetta 3 at some point as well. Now, the next game to talk about is actually something that, as an Ace Attorney fan, I was actually really eager to get into. The Great Ace Attorney is an interesting game within the Ace Attorney franchise, because the Ace Attorney games are normally set in around modern time. It's a little goofy when like what the actual timeline is. But it's always around the modern time, and you have the 6 main games from Ace Attorney 1 to Spirit of Justice, and then you've got the 2 Ace Attorney investigation games with Miles Edgeworth. You have the first one, and you have the second one, which wasn't actually localized, and fans had to localize that for Capcom, which, seriously, Capcom, just pay them for their translation, and just put that on, like, the Switch or whatever. Please. Give us Ace Attorney Investigations 2 properly. I would pay for that. Anyway, The Great Ace Attorney is very interesting because it's a prequel set like over 100 years prior to any of the main games. So it takes place in London with Ryunosuke, who is the ancestor of Phoenix Wright. Now, something to talk about with Ace Attorney as a whole is that there's a weird thing going on with the English version, because when they localized the first game, this was during a time, in the early 2000s, where a lot of Japanese stuff was Americanized. Everything was changed to be from Japan to America. Characters were renamed. This is why certain characters, like in Pokemon, Satoshi is Ash, right? And then you have, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! And then a lot of changes like that. And basically, any anime at the time that was set in Japan, a lot of them changed to be American in the dubs. Because, of course, these companies were like, well, we don't think that the kids can handle it. The kids could handle it. But it's interesting looking back, because the way this affected Ace Attorney is that this resulted in an alternate continuity from the Japanese version. Like, they have full-on embraced it. Because the first game was made to be deliberately vague in that regard, because they were trying to have a more, mass appeal. So changing it to be in California it's not really that big of a deal. Well, then future games, they started to lean in more into the Japanese stuff, and especially in the second trilogy, Apollo Justice, Dual Destinies, and Spirit of Justice, it's far more heavily leaning into the Japanese aspect, and then all of a sudden, they're having to come up with their own explanations for why do you have all this Japanese stuff. I mean, you always had, like, the Fae Clan, right? And you had Korean Village. But you have all this stuff that is very Japanese, and you're like, why is this stuff in America? And then they had to come up with this whole, like, alternate continuity to explain why, the World War II didn't really happen. There was no, like, thing going on, so Japanese culture flourished in America, and it's so funny because they have stuck with that. They have stuck with that all this time, and I love it, because Ace Attorney is a very goofy series, and yes, it revolves around murder cases, but it's overall very silly about a lot of stuff. So this very obviously localized stuff, it kind of fits with Ace Attorney, because it almost feels like satire of those very ideas, and Ace Attorney is drenched in satire of the Japanese legal system, and it works, right? It kind of works. It's funny like that. It just kind of works. But the Great Ace Attorney doesn't localize things as much. There are some things, especially with Herlock. He's not Sherlock Holmes, he's Herlock Sholmes, which I love that. That's perfect. I love that so much. You have Ryunosuke Naruhodo. Okay, well, you have, Phoenix Wright's original Japanese name. Oh, it's Naruhodo. And then you're like, wait a minute, but he's the ancestor of Phoenix Wright. So within even the American continuity, you're like, okay, well, Phoenix Wright's got some Japanese ancestry 100 years back. Now, how that ended up changing of Ryunosuke, I guess, going to America and maybe marrying a American lady, probably. I doubt they're ever actually going to try to explain that. So fans are free to come up with their own ideas on that. Now, at first I was a little annoyed with it because the Great Ace Attorney games were never localized in the West. They were just 3DS games that were in Japan. So when they were finally announcing, oh, we're bringing it onto the Switch, and we're everywhere, we're bringing it everywhere. But we're bringing it and localizing it, and then they didn't change the Japanese names. And a lot of people, myself included, were like, oh, well, we were kind of hoping you would localize it like the other ones. But when you play the game, it really becomes clear why you can't really do that. Because it's not just the presence of Japanese culture in it. The whole cultural and, frankly, racial tensions between the English and the Japanese are really important to the story. Like, it's actually genuinely important that you have Japanese and English characters interacting. So there's no way you could have done The Great Ace Attorney and localized it to be very sort of American. Because there's no way. It's very obviously they're in Britain. You have a Sherlock Sholmes running around.
Sherlock Sholmes. I presume you must have heard of me.
You have, very clear, references to Sherlock Holmes characters and stories and stuff like that. They reference stuff like Hound of the Baskervilles and stuff like that. That's something that gets referenced multiple times. And it really makes sense that, you can't do that. So we'll just have to say, Phoenix Wright has Japanese ancestry now. But to talk about the games themselves, they're actually really interesting. Because unlike the other Ace Attorney games, this one splits its story across multiple games. Now, it's not like, say, any of the Ace Attorney games like Ace Attorney 1, Justice for All, Trials and Tribulations, Apollo Justice, Dual Destinies, and Spirit of Justice. Each of those have, overall within that game, a self-contained plot. You'll have multiple cases, and not all of them are going to add to the overall plot. But it does usually build up to some kind of conclusion. All of them did that. In The Great Ace Attorney, both games are part of a singular narrative. One thing it did feel like it was supposed to be, it really feels like it was supposed to be a trilogy, because by the time you get to the very end of The Great Ace Attorney 2, it does feel like they kind of rushed some conclusions. And I feel like Shitakumi wanted a trilogy for that. But maybe that was a little overly ambitious. It still ends up wrapping up, rather nicely. They do wrap up pretty much everything in a nice bow. It's a very interesting story when you look at it, because, you have Ryunosuke, he's a Japanese, student, a college student, who's going to practice law in England. And it's funny because you get a little of this in Apollo Justice, the introduction of an idea of a jury system. So it's very clearly that Shitakumi wanted to play around with a jury system. And the jury system is a big part of The Great Ace Attorney. Because you don't just have a judge to convince. You've got, a judge, and you've got the jury. And you have to have a lot of back and forth with the jury members and show stuff to convince those jury members, and, go back and forth and talk with them, along with the usual stuff with witnesses and, trying to find contradictions and pointing that stuff out. It's very fun to play. It really is fun. I really did like playing it. There's a lot they do, and I do hope a lot of those aspects of the court cases and the investigations are kept going forward, because Spirit of Justice, I like what Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice does. And if you can combine stuff that Spirit of Justice was doing with stuff that The Great Ace Attorney did, I'd really like to see a lot of those ideas meld together in a new Ace Attorney game. Come on, Capcom, when are we getting Ace Attorney 7? The Great Ace Attorney is a game that actually really did surprise me. Now, The Great Ace Attorney is a game that filled to the brim with really likable characters. Like, Herlock, you can't not talk about Herlock Sholmes. He is, like, this absolute silly parody of Sherlock Holmes. And he is such a doofus. He's actually really smart. Like, he isn't, like, outright dumb, but he's exceptionally weird. Which, that's pretty on point for Sherlock Holmes. Let's be honest. But whereas Sherlock Holmes can come in and, you know, solve a case easily, Herlock will come in and, like, put together all the clues and then come to a comically weird conclusion. Like, he looks at a Japanese guy and thinks he's Russian for some reason. And it's funny. And he's got Iris Wilson, who's basically acting as his Watson. And she's the one, like, writing the books and stuff. And being his investigative partner while also sort of being, like, a surrogate daughter. Which is an interesting dynamic with a Sherlock Holmes, you know, inspired character. To go the sort of a more fatherly route. Even if he's also a complete and utter disaster. Now, I will say, if you're a fan of Ace Attorney, or if you're a fan of investigative games in general, I would say definitely check out the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. You can get it, you have both games packaged together, so I'd recommend this, especially if you're a fan of Ace Attorney and you've never heard of these games before they came over to the West. Now, speaking of games featuring Japanese characters... Now, the next one to talk about is Pokemon Legends Arceus. This is a game that is really interesting, especially when you look at, you know, what came before and what we know comes after it, especially with, like, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet being, like, actual open worlds. In Sword and Shield, you had the wild areas, which are these big, expansive areas that you could just run around in. They were like mini open worlds in between the more traditional routes, where you have these small, very, like, linear sections going from point A to point B. And then you have these wild areas, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of stuff. And you see the Pokemon running around. And then you move to Pokemon Legends Arceus, which has bigger, expansive areas. And you have these bigger, large areas that you go out into to catch Pokemon. And it's a really interesting game to play because it mixes up a lot of the traditional Pokemon mechanics. You still have, like, regular turn-based battling, but they mix it up with, you know, the different styles, like the agile style and the strong style, that changes how things play out a little bit in the battle. And you have, you know, the fact that it's set in the past, and it's like, oh, your Pokedex is literally you writing in a journal, and you have to go around actually collecting a bunch of different types of Pokemon, and multiple types of them in order to see variations and stuff, in order to progress in your rank. It's actually really interesting, and I would love to see another Legends style game, because obviously they're not going to keep doing stuff like that in, like, the mainline games. They're obviously not going to be having them play exactly the same, because the mainline games have a very, very set style, and even with Scarlet and Violet, that still keeps a lot of the similar mechanics. But the Legends game is its own little sub-series, and I'd like to see them continue developing that, because it's actually really fun. You go out and you're running around just capturing all these Pokemon and doing all these battles and traversing the environments. You have these large open areas, which are bigger than the wild areas from Sword and Shield. And it's actually a little bit more like, say, Monster Hunter, where you go into these areas that are like these segments, and they can be like bigger, more expansive areas like that. It's on a full open world, but it's like you got a mini open areas. It's actually kind of a bit more like Sonic Frontiers, how it has each of these individual islands, and they're the open zones, rather than one gigantic open world. I was actually really surprised that I ended up liking the story of it. I don't think I did the post-game stuff, but I completed all of the main story and I did some of the post-game stuff. But I actually really like the story. It's the first time in a while that I played a Pokemon game, and I'm like, wow, I actually enjoyed that story. Not that Pokemon stories are bad, usually they're just okay. But this felt like it was doing something different, right? Significantly different, especially with the whole time travel aspect. And it's like, oh wow, it's like actually Dawn and Lucas from, Diamond and Pearl being sent back in time. It's all sorts of crazy. And then they're given a magical cell phone by Arceus. Wacky stuff, but it's cool. It's really nice to see like the Pokemon being experimented with more significantly and not just doing the same thing over and over. I had a lot of fun going around and exploring these different areas and talking to all these characters and getting stuff of what would eventually become like the Sinnoh region. But like way back before it was even called the Sinnoh region. And they have Pokeballs, but the level of technology of Pokeballs has always been weird, especially since you can make it from nuts. I don't really question the technology in Pokemon because it can always be a little bonkers. But it's such a cool experiment, and I know that they were probably wanting to do a more dedicated sub-series, and I would love to see them do more. Like a Legends game that takes place in, say, like Kanto, or Johto, or Hoenn, or Unova. Especially when you get a lot of, like, backstory and history in some of these regions, and they'll say, oh, 500 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, this stuff happened, or in ancient times. And it's like, yeah, it'd be kind of neat if we could see what happened in the ancient times, and even catch a glimpse of some of the stuff that was referenced. It's something I really want to see them do more with, especially what we've seen in Scarlet and Violet, them going with a full open world. And I want to see them keep experimenting with Pokemon. And Pokemon Legends Arceus was very, very interesting. Now, to talk about stuff that I replayed in 2022.
How does it feel, Wayne, to stand on the very stones that ran your parents' blood?
You become what you've always fought against, and I will stop you.
When the mugger or the thief stops to think twice, that is fear. That is what I am. I am the reason the criminals breathe easier when the sun rises.
My side doesn't leave suspects with broken bones and missing teeth. We've earned Gotham's respect.
If that were true, I wouldn't believe you.
Had to spoil everything, didn't you?
It's over, Joker.
You know there's only one way to stop me.
You must show you are willing to take a life to save the world.
Welcome to the madhouse, Batman! I set a trap and you sprang it gloriously!
The Arkham games were something I revisited. Me and Angelin went through and we played through the games, because she hadn't actually gone through them. I played the Arkham games, but she hadn't played them. She was going through them for the first time, and I was revisiting them. We played through Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and Arkham Origins. Ah, the trilogy. And it's funny, because I had not touched Arkham Asylum since, like, 2010, back when I first played it, because I never actually owned Arkham Asylum. I actually played it on a friend's 360 back in the day, and it's funny, I remember liking it, I remember enjoying playing it, and I played through Arkham City and Arkham Origins, which are both very similar, and they had a lot of upgrades in terms of the gameplay and all those mechanics. In fact, I actually have them right over here. Yeah, I got the Armored Edition on the Wii U, and I got the Wii U version of Arkham Origins. But when I was going through them with Angel, and we actually played the games on the Remastered Collection, except for Arkham Origins, which hasn't gotten a re-release, and it wasn't a part of the collection like the other Rocksteady Arkham games. And it's weird, like, they never remastered it, they never even gave a Game of the Year edition or a completed edition where they packaged all the DLC onto it, like they did with Arkham City. And I originally played the Armored Edition, which has, new stuff, with the new suit and the new, like, electric stuff, which is funny, because it actually comes back in Arkham Origins. But with Angel, we actually had to get a 360 disc and play it on that. We had difficulty getting all the DLC, we tried getting the Mr. Freeze DLC, because I never got to play it, because I don't know if anyone actually knows, but the Mr. Freeze DLC was actually canceled for the Wii U version. Yeah, I was actually pissed off back then, but I never played it. It was really funny, though, going back to Arkham Asylum, playing that for the first time in over a decade, and I was struggling with it at first. The timing for the counters felt wrong. Like, some of the timing felt weird. Some of the combat just... something was wrong with it. Well, it's funny, after going through the whole game, and then going to Arkham City, boom, I was doing excellently with Arkham City, and oh, it suddenly hit me. They had made some tweaks and fixed a few issues from Arkham Asylum going into Arkham City. I'm like, oh yeah. And since I played the crap out of Arkham City and I played the crap out of Arkham Origins, it's like, yeah, that suddenly makes a lot of sense, because those are the games I was used to. So I was used to the different, like, counter timing, which is why I struggled on landing any counters in Arkham Asylum. Now, Arkham Asylum was the game that really put, well, Batman games on the map. Now, there's been Batman games in the past, but they've never been as well received as Asylum, because Asylum, even though it does have some flaws which were ironed out later in City ironed out a lot of stuff, but with Arkham Asylum it really laid that foundation. Now, of course, it took inspiration from comics, but overall the story is pretty simple, and it didn't really need to be overly complex because, well, it's a Batman video game. Joker takes over Arkham Asylum, Batman has to stop him, and through his adventure he runs into members of his rogues gallery. I don't know how much more you need than that. Especially because this is the first game that tackled Batman in a way that made you feel like Batman. You ran around fighting guys and beating up entire swarms of enemies. You had all these gadgets. You could sneak around. You can do all this stuff. Yeah, it really laid that groundwork. With City, it expanded on everything. I already mentioned it tightened up a lot of the controls. It let you do more investigations, which is always good. There's always been some, exploration, investigation stuff, but City was like, okay, no, we're gonna have some more investigations. You'll follow clues, and you'll have little crime scenes you can investigate, and stuff like that, along with sneaking around, having, expanding the whole, the sneaking mechanics with the Predator, arenas, and then, making the combat feel a lot better. Of course, adding more gadgets. City brought in a lot of stuff. You got to see the League of Assassins, you got to fight Ra's al Ghul, you got to see Talia al Ghul, you got Catwoman running around, you get to play as Catwoman too. She has her own little side plot. I mean, it's not like the most interesting Batman story I've ever seen. And I feel like it could have done more with using Hugo Strange. Because Hugo Strange is actually a pretty good Batman villain. I felt like he was a little underused. But, overall, the story does its job. I mean, personally, and I've made this abundantly clear, Origins is my favorite. That one is going to be my number one. And as much as I think that Arkham Origins is the best, those games laid the groundwork that Arkham Origins is built on. I mean, Asylum had a lot of little Easter eggs and stuff, and City had even more. Lots of references to various different Batman stories. One of the little side stories you get is seeing Azrael. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And while a lot of the antagonists take up very small parts of the story, it's neat seeing this universe's version of Two-Face and Penguin, and of course Mr. Freeze. You can't not talk about the Mr. Freeze boss fight, because that is widely considered to be the best boss fight in the series, and it's not hard to see why. Especially because it had the gimmick of, you have to take him down multiple times, but every time you use a particular move or gadget or whatever, Mr. Freeze would take precautions to make sure you can't do that again. Oh, so if you use this big electromagnet, he'll freeze the electromagnets. Oh, you come out from, the guardrails, he'll freeze the guardrails, and stuff like that. And it's actually really neat, and it's kind of tense because you're kind of, looking around, and thinking, okay, what can I do? What are my options? And what do I have left? And it really plays into the strengths of Batman while also really highlighting the gameplay. Because, yeah, you have all these gadgets and all these things around you, and it's like, all right, figure it out. take down Mr. Freeze before he freezes your butt. There's a reason why City is viewed as, by a lot of people, to be the best in the franchise. It's pretty freaking good. It's fun to play. And even Angel was like, after we'd beaten the main game, she was like, can we go to Origins next? Do we beat the game? And I'm like, I don't know, there's a couple side stories we gotta finish. You gotta find, the last, Azrael location. And we gotta complete the little Hush stuff. You gotta see this stuff. I want you to see this. So yeah, I had a lot of fun going back and replaying Arkham Asylum, even though Arkham Asylum felt a little rough going back to it. A lot of fun playing, Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and especially Arkham Origins. I love Arkham Origins! And of course, I can't talk about the Arkham games without talking about Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. Both of them came back and reprised their roles as Batman and Joker, and what else is there to say? They knocked it out of the park every single time. I mean, that naturally comes when they've both been doing that role for decades. But they seriously did a fantastic job in the Arkham games. And you can hear not just the talent, but the experience in their voice. If you actually go back and you watch, early Batman the Animated Series, you can tell that both of them were a little bit rougher with the voices. They still did a good job, but there's a difference between when you listen to them then and you listen to them in the Arkham games, because they have decades of experience. And there's a reason why both of them had been doing those roles for 30 years. They're really good at it. And it's funny, no matter how simple any specific line or any story beat is, both of them put 120% into every single line. You can hear that power behind Kevin Conroy's voice. Every single line Mark Hamill delivers as the Joker is filled to the brim with his energy. I mean, it really does help that these two have actually played off of each other so much in previous material. As someone who grew up with Batman the Animated Series, I did appreciate playing the Arkham games, that they brought back my favorite Batman and my favorite Joker voice actors. I mean, I grew up with Batman the Animated Series. So, of course, Kevin Conroy is my Batman. There are other good actors who have played Batman really well, but Kevin Conroy will forever be the voice I hear with Batman. No matter which version it is, when I think of Batman, I think of his voice. And Mark Hamill, likewise, has very, very much defined the role of Joker. And they both do a fantastic job in the Arkham games. But it was not just fun replaying the games, because they're good games, but it was also fun seeing Angelin's reaction, especially when we got to Arkham Origins, which I know it's kind of a hot take, but Arkham Origins is what I think the peak of the series. It's the best Arkham game. I like playing it the most. I like the story the most. It is, frankly, hands down, the best story in the entire series. It being a prequel, it's actually really interesting. You see a lot of stuff that's going to come into play later. I mean, hell, you get to see just Wonder Tower. It's interesting to see that, but I also like how a lot of the stuff is written. And seeing a lot of characters, even like Deathstroke, and honestly, Deadshot's treated better in Arkham Origins than he is in Arkham City. But it was really cool to see all these characters and seeing Lady Shiva show up to fight Batman, and all these assassins trying to go after Batman in his early years. It was really cool, and Roger Craig Smith and Troy Baker did phenomenal jobs as Batman and Joker. And it was really funny because I had gassed up Troy Baker's Joker, for years. And when Angelin first got to the scene where Joker first comes in, you actually get to hear him talk. Her jaw was on the floor when she heard it, because, and I swear, I don't know what voodoo magic Troy Baker did, but he sounds freaking identical to Mark Hamill's Joker.
You wasted the antidote on yourself?
Well, this should be interesting.
I'm feeling generous. I'll give you this one for free. The Bat! Your partner!
My partner? Oh, that's... it's so... What a night!
Because there's just a certain way that Mark Hamill, like, voices Joker that's different from anyone else. Even if someone else is trying to imitate him, you can tell it's not them. If you heard, like, John DiMaggio play Joker in, like, the Under the Red Hood movie, it's different. Even if they're both playing the same character. But the way that Troy Baker did Joker, it was eerie. Like, there are a few bits that if you're listening carefully, you can tell, okay, he's not quite how Mark Hamill would do it, but a lot of it is so good that if you hadn't told me that it wasn't Mark Hamill, I would have thought it was Mark Hamill. And while Roger Craig Smith, you can hear a little bit of that Chris Redfield in some scenes, he also does a generally really good job as a young Kevin Conroy Bruce Wayne. It's actually really crazy, and I would love to see Roger Craig Smith and Troy Baker come back as Batman and the Joker in other media. It could be TV shows and animated movies or whatever. I'd like to hear them do that more because I think they did a great job that a lot of people, I think, really need to hear. You just look up some clips of Joker, and even the way he does his little cackles and laughs, and even those thing that Mark Hamill does, Troy Baker can nail it. It's freaking eerie. And it's funny because a lot of people have criticized Origins for including the Joker so significantly in the story, which, to a degree, I understand. Joker was the main antagonist of Arkham Asylum. He was one of the main antagonists in Arkham City. And then, okay, again, he's another major antagonist in Arkham Origins. But I feel like, at least with Arkham Origins, it really makes sense. It feels like it's justified. Which is funny, because I was wondering what Angelin's response would be. And, you know, it wasn't really something that she had much of an issue with, which I didn't really have much of an issue with either. I still think that Origins has the best plot. And considering it's a prequel, you can also play it, you know, without playing Asylum and City. Though there's a lot of things that you'll appreciate more, little details in Origins that you'll only really notice if you played Asylum and City. But Origins did, and I know I'm talking mostly about Origins here, but Origins really is my favorite. And I really enjoyed it. Especially when I get to see Bane being the smart, intelligent, manipulative villain that he always should be.
Move it along, big boy.
No, he's coming for you now. And when he gets here, I'm going to kill him. So you wait.
Especially in the other Arkham games where he's just kind of not. But it ties really well into the overall like narrative in a lot of sense with a lot of those characters. And another detail that I really love about Arkham Origins, and it's a small one, but they got Harvey Bullock's voice actor from Batman the Animated Series to reprise his role as Harvey Bullock in Arkham Origins. So even if he's just in a few scenes, just hearing that voice, because I grew up with Batman the Animated Series, and all of those voices are incredibly nostalgic for me. So hearing that old one, especially because he's actually swearing and he's not in a kid show anymore, he can swear, and hearing Batman the Animated Series Harvey Bullock swearing.
Who else would jump off a building to save your sorry ass?
It felt so right. It just, yeah, I can hear Harvey Bullock saying that, and it's just a little detail. I felt so much love for Batman in Arkham Origins. And like, I have stuff that I would criticize Arkham Asylum for, Arkham City for, even though I really like playing those games. There are things that I can criticize about those, but there's far less to criticize with Arkham Origins. And if anyone knows me, I am a very picky Batman fan. Oh, I'm a huge Batman fan, but I'm very, very picky about stuff that I like. I don't like most of the live-action movies. The only one that I actually enjoy watching is Batman Begins, and I still have criticism for that. So it's funny because Adrian was telling me, like, when we got to Arkham Origins, that was the one she wanted to get into the most, more than Asylum, more than City, because I love Origins so much. And she was like, you're really, really particular about Batman, and if you're gushing about this, I want to check it out. And she ended up really loving it too, and yes, I think Origins really needs to be appreciated more. I love Origins. I really love Origins. Also, another little detail before we move on, I really like the voice they got for Deathstroke. Mark Rolston does a really good Deathstroke.
Looks like you got my invitation. Just you and me. Come on!
It appears the game is over before it even begins.
But I could gush about this all day. Just one little thing more with Deathstroke. Okay, no, I also need to say Black Mask. Even though Black Mask doesn't play as big of a role as I think some people would have hoped, the fact that they actually had Black Mask in it and actually were showing him more and showing his, crime syndicate, like, honestly, that's great. Especially when in Arkham City, he was just kind of a joke, little, almost Easter egg that you can find. But anyway, going back to Deathstroke. There's something really interesting about the Deathstroke fight, because the Deathstroke fight is fantastic. I love the Deathstroke fight. It's one of my favorite fights in the entire game. But it's funny, especially replaying it, especially after, rewatching, like, the Teen Titans show, that it's funny because I noticed that they actually, because if you remember in the Teen Titans show, Slade, they didn't call him Deathstroke, but Slade in the show had a very sort of mentor, like a very twisted mentor-student thing going on with, like, Robin. I actually noticed there were shades of that in how he interacted with Batman. Especially when they're fighting and he's, like, giving him tips and calling out that he, like, missed an opening and stuff. And it's funny because it almost feels like even though he was, like, trying to go after Batman for the reward, that it almost felt like he was sort of testing him and treating him like almost like a student. It's really interesting. And okay, alright, I can't not talk about, I know, I'll get to something else other than Arkham Origins, but that was truly the highlight of the replay. But before we actually played through the games, I had to show Adrian the Deathstroke versus Batman trailer that they released before the game came out, because it is a really freaking cool trailer. You get to see this really freaking awesome Batman versus Deathstroke fight, and then Deadshot comes in and he's like sniping and doing his thing, just sort of interrupting stuff, and so much love for Batman in it. And it's funny because I actually was really interested in seeing who wrote the game, and I looked it up, and there was actually this writing company that they hired people from. Those people must have really cared about Batman. Like, it felt like they did their research. It felt like they were doing a lot to really honor Batman's legacy, but also make sure it tied into the Arkham games. Like, yeah, the gameplay for it is just more of Arkham City, but Arkham City had fantastic gameplay. Having more of that fantastic gameplay, what more could you want? And then on top of that, you have a story that I adore. I love the story of Arkham Origins, and it feels like when they were making it, the devs working on it, the writers working on it, it felt like there was so much passion and love for Batman being channeled into it. Now, one thing I have to make sure I talk about with Arkham Origins is the Cold Cold Heart DLC. Now, we couldn't play the DLC because for some reason they haven't remastered Arkham Origins, they haven't re-released it, it's not with the collection. You don't have any version of it. You don't even have a Game of the Year version that you can buy on, say, like Xbox 360 and PS3 or anything that has all the DLC with it. You know, and I learned now that if you get it on Steam, then yeah, you can get all the DLC with it, but if you're playing it on a console, you just don't have that option. And even trying to buy it on the store, which you should be able to, it's really, really finicky with trying to get any of that to work. So what Angel and I ended up doing was we ended up watching a playthrough. We looked it up and hey, alright, here's this playthrough, you know, from this channel that does Arkham stuff. So yeah, let's watch their playthrough. And they were fantastic. They didn't just go through the story. They made sure to look around the area. They talked to the NPCs, so you got their dialogue. And then they were also freaking flawless whenever they were playing the game. Like, untouched. I think they were even playing on the hardest difficulty. And they were just steamrolling through everything. It literally was just like you would imagine Batman would be doing it. Because he'd be breaking out this, you know, high-flying kung fu, you know, whooping all these thugs' butt. And it was a great experience actually watching it. And it's probably the next best thing to actually playing it. Because you got to see someone who was really competent and thorough, good, because I like to go around talking to the NPCs. So now I want to hear what they have to say. So it's nice to see someone who's good at the game and was making sure to go through and talk to the different NPCs and say, hey, what does Vicky Vale have to say? What does Alfred have to say? What does Civilian Number 1 have to say? And it's interesting because that whole DLC story is based off of the episode Heart of Ice from Batman the Animated Series, which is one of the most iconic and beloved episodes in the DCAU as a whole, but especially in Batman the Animated Series. While it's not a one-to-one translation, it features basically the same plot, but just sort of revamped to be a video game. And you have a little bit more expanded on, because it's not just a singular episode. You know, you have a couple of hours to mess around with here. So you get some more backstory, you get a little bit more details on Mr. Freeze's backstory. And it's nice to see, like, the beginning of Mr. Freeze in the Arkhamverse. Maybe because he's likable when you see him in Arkham City, especially when you find Nora at the end. You know, after you've completed the story, you go and you find Nora, and you get to just have him be with Nora. It's like, oh, it's a little nice thing you can do with them. Because Mr. Heart of Ice did a really good job revamping Mr. Freeze, and that's translated into, you know, Cold Cold Heart, and you get to see that even in Arkham City, where you get to see this sympathetic, you know, you get to see, you know, Mr. Freeze is not, yeah, he does some bad things, but he's not an evil guy, you know, in his heart, right? He's not evil, he's just a very messed up person who's been driven to do these things through grief. And as a big fan of that episode, and a big fan of Batman the Animated Series in general, Cold Cold Heart was a fantastic DLC that I really enjoyed watching that playthrough of. Because he did a fantastic job with that.
Dude, can you even hear us?
Don't worry about us. Just concentrate on getting away.
This is one I had to talk about. Now, I've played Persona 5 on the PS4, the original Persona 5, and Persona 5 Royal, before I ever played Persona 5 Royal on the Switch. Now, there is a difference to this. See, whenever I played with Angel Ran, I was playing off of a New Game Plus file that she already had. She'd already played the game, beat it, maxed out social stats, and had this full compendium, so a lot of stuff was really easy. But when I was playing it by myself on my Switch, I was starting from zero, and it was a totally different experience. Like, there are certain, like, confidants and stuff and little side stuff that you can do, but you have to be, like, certain levels of some of your social stats. You need to have, you know, X amount of guts, or you need to have X amount of intelligence, or X amount of kindness, or whatever, in order to do that. And it's funny, stuff that I would normally have started very early on, I couldn't do. And I had to spend a lot of time doing a lot of these little side activities, building up the social stats first, before I can get to the other stuff. And I've played Persona 5 enough where I actually did basically get all of the confidants done before the main part of the game, because Royal adds new story content after that. But I got pretty much everything done except like one little bit. I was almost finished with all the confidants. But it was a fascinating experience because it made Persona 5 feel very different, because I actually had to do a lot more planning around not just completing confidants and completing the palaces and doing the mementos requests to go after people's shadows who are doing bad stuff, but I also had to be building up my social stats, and I managed to complete that all before I got to the end. And when I got into the extra semester that they added in Royal, it was basically just cleaning up a little bit along with doing the extra content. And Persona 5 Royal is a great game. It's a great game. The game's been out for a while, but it's new on the Switch, and I'm glad it's finally on the Switch. It's long overdue. But it's really interesting to play it again, but not have Angel, because Angel's a walking Persona 5 encyclopedia. She knows that game inside and out. If there's any question I would always have, I just ask her, hey, what do you do this? How do you do that? But with this, I was on my own, and I looked up some stuff on guides, because there's some stuff in terms of, like, confidant answers and some choices to get the best one. But overall, it was mostly just due to me planning things out of how I would go, because I know how the game goes, that I actually got that sense of pride and accomplishment that I had planned this out, and I actually used my own experience with Persona in order to basically complete everything in my first playthrough. Now, I don't want to spoil stuff, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff in Persona 5, especially the stuff that they added in Royal. I think they added some really good content. Unfortunately, before I even completed my first playthrough, I was actually spoiled to basically all the new stuff. And it didn't make it any less enjoyable, but like, I wouldn't want anyone to get spoiled to the new stuff, because it's some really, really good new stuff. But and it's funny, since I played Vanilla and I played Royal multiple times, it's funny comparing them, because Royal, oh my gosh, Royal did so many things that were just little quality of life changes over Vanilla. Like, one of the big ones, and this by itself would have made the game infinitely better over Vanilla, is the fact that you can baton pass to your teammates right when they join. Because baton passing is like, okay, if you hit an enemy on their weakness and you down them, then you get an extra turn, and you can baton pass, and you can have another teammate attack on the same turn. And Royal really added a lot to this, but in the original game, baton pass was unlocked only after you started their confidant. Now, the problem with that is that when they join in their respective palace that they're unlocked in, a lot of the enemies have weaknesses to that new team member. It really encourages you to use them in that palace. But the problem is they couldn't baton pass. and you would have to wait until after you were done with that before you could even start their confidant and unlock the ability to baton pass. Royal just changed that and says no, the second they join, they can baton pass, which makes using them in their respective palace a lot better. And there's a lot of little stuff that they added, little side events and stuff. They added Kijijoji, which is actually a location from like the old Shin Megami Tensei games, which is actually really interesting to see that come back. You have new shops, new side activities that you can do, and a couple new confidants. And I've actually talked a little about some of that in previous videos, like some of my topic videos. But overall, it was really fun replaying Persona 5 Royal, by myself in a fresh save file where I had to take care of all that planning myself instead of relying on Angel Ren with her encyclopedic knowledge of Persona 5. So I know this is a bit of a downer to end the video game section on, but I would be remiss to not bring up the passing of Billy Kametz. He's the voice actor of Dr. Maruki in Persona 5 Royal, and he's also done other notable roles, in particular Ferdinand von Aegir in Fire Emblem Three Houses. Unfortunately, in 2022, he lost his battle with cancer. He was an incredible voice actor who he is an incredible voice actor who always does a fantastic job. But he was also a great person. And it really makes replaying Royal hit a lot harder when, knowing that Billy Kametz has passed. But I wanted to put a tribute to him in the video, which was actually edited by Angel Ren. She made this, and I just wanted to do this to honor Billy Kametz.
His greed got the better of him. He has strayed far from the righteous path. As the next Duke Aegir, I will succeed him as Prime Minister, and it will fall to me to hold him accountable. Only then can I justly guide the Empire's subjects and work to create a better world. Go on then. I'll leave for you the final blow. You leave me nothing. This was ever my burden to bear. Father! No, you're just a traitor now. In light of your crimes against the Empire, the punishment is death! Yourself struggling in life, you can start over, like me. Remember that. So yeah, if that ends up saving you, then we're square.
What I'm trying to say is, even if your life is full of worries, it's best for you not to obsess over them. Your existence in this world is an amazing miracle. You deserve to spend your days in happiness. I'll keep on rooting for all of you to have the best lives possible, even after I'm long gone.
So, talking about TV shows that I watched in 2022, there's not actually a lot of new stuff that I watched. A lot of it's going to be rewatching stuff. There's one show that's not new, but is the first time that I was watching it, which is the first show I'm going to be talking about today.
Deep in the heart of the city, he watches for signs of danger. You know him as Superman. The future of Metropolis is in the hands of the Man of Steel.
Superman the Animated Series. It boggles my mind that I watched Batman the Animated Series obsessively as a kid, but I never watched Superman the Animated Series. I think I remember seeing some bits when you're flicking through the channels And oh, there's an episode of that came on. Now I admit, as a kid, I was pretty laser focused on Batman, to the point where I didn't even care about like Nightwing or Batgirl or anyone. I just cared about Batman. But in 2022, I actually decided to sit down and watch some of Superman the Animated Series. I didn't finish all of it, but I did get through a couple of seasons. And its reputation as one of the best adaptations of Superman is absolutely deserved. Now, I've heard a lot of people criticize Superman as, oh, well, he's boring, or, you know, he's just too much of a goody two-shoes, or stuff like that. And I will not deny that there are bad adaptations of Superman out there, much in the same way that there are bad adaptations of Batman. Look, I love Batman the Animated Series. I love Batman. But there are definitely bad versions of Batman. Different versions where he is, in fact, an outright Gary Stu, or he's just utterly obnoxious or devoid of a personality. Those exist. In much in the same way that Superman has bad adaptations. Ones that don't properly take into account his personality, or just cut out the stuff that actually makes him likable. Superman the Animated Series does not do this. And I would encourage anyone who thinks Superman is boring or doesn't have a personality or isn't interesting at all, I would recommend just checking out Superman the Animated Series. It's not a movie, it's not a series of movies. You don't even have to go to like the DC animated movies, which you have some of those are good, like Superman versus the Elite. But you can just watch a few episodes of Superman the Animated Series and you can get what Superman is. Like, I've gone through 2 seasons, and I have yet to see a bad episode. I mean, of course, coming from the guys behind Batman the Animated Series, not too surprising. But it's a show that really captures what Superman is, and is able to deliver great episodes that not only touch on Superman, but also bring in other heroes and other, you know, characters in the DC universe. It's not like a crossover show. I mean, you have Justice League that happened later on. It does have other DC universe characters come in, which are always interesting to see. You have Superman who's not just portrayed with his morals, because he's a good old farm boy, right? This is a dude raised, you know, by a couple of good old folks out in the middle of a farm, so he's got his good old boy attitude, but they also make sure to portray him the way he should. Because, yes, Batman is the smart one. He's the world's greatest detective. But Superman is not stupid. Just because he's super strong does not mean he's super stupid. And we actually do get to see that he is actually pretty darn clever. He's not the world's greatest detective, of course, but we get to see him, especially when he faces off against Mr. This guy. Just when he gets to face off against him, you actually get to see him showing just how smart he can be.
In your face, Superman!
No, loser. In yours.
I skywrote my own name. Backwards.
Twice.
You were just toying with me the whole time. Even from the start.
Pretty much, yeah.
You get to see that Superman, despite the fact that he's so powerful, is not someone who can just instantly solve all problems immediately. He's not all powerful, and he is, to a degree, only, well, I say only human, but he's Kryptonian. But, like, you understand what I mean, right? He's not someone who can handle everything. He's not someone who can predict the future or do anything like that. But we get to see him go through these adventures and these conflicts, and you get to see him, you know, play off against other characters. Like Lois Lane is fantastic in this, in many different ways. And she's extremely sassy. And it's so funny, she has such a great chemistry with Clark and as Superman.
Look, Smallville, nothing against you, but even as a kid, I never liked babysitting. You want to keep up with me, you gotta be quick. I'm no tour guide and I don't hold hands. What'd you get?
A shared byline, if you use it.
I apologize. You're not the Rube Hayseed I took you for. Nice S.
Excuse me?
Right here. He's strong, he flies, he's the Nietzschean fantasy ideal all wrapped up in a red cape. What's your secret?
What do you mean?
Well, you don't go around in blue tights and a cape all the time, do you? What do you do in your off hours?
I think that's a question for another time.
You haven't heard about the Toy Man?
Who?
Nice try, Smallville, but this one's mine.
This show also gave us Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor.
Oh, Clancy Brown!
Clancy Brown's always a god-tier voice actor, and he does a fantastic job as Lex Luthor.
I'm afraid we already have a window washer. Oh, the silent treatment, eh? Well, I don't know what you thought you heard out there, but I know what you can prove, and it's nothing. You see, Superman, I own Metropolis. My technology built it, my will keeps it going, and nearly 2/3 of its people work for me whether they know it or not.
We've got to consider the psychological effects, the aggression factor.
If there are problems, we'll deal with them as they arise.
That's not how I operate.
Oh, yes, it is. You work for me, remember?
He has such a powerful voice that sometimes it hits you. This guy's also Mr. Krabs.
Yeah, look! Just ran out!
Hey man, he's back! You're crushing my arm!
Unhand that penny or the arm comes off!
But Lex Luthor, apart from having a fantastic voice, is also written so well. Yes, he is a bad guy. He's also very cunning, intelligent, but also selfish and an egomaniac. But he's not just someone who wants to just kill people for no reason. He's not the Joker. He's not chaotic. Because Lex Luthor thinks he's in the right. He sees Superman as a threat, and even if he does bad stuff, Lex Luthor in his own twisted mind thinks he's the good guy in that situation. But unlike a lot of modern media, the show never tries to say, oh, well, actually, Lex Luthor is really a good guy and you should feel sorry for him. No, it goes, look, this guy's kind of a bastard. But he's an entertaining bastard.
You magnificent bastard, I read your book!
I love seeing in Superman the Animated Series how they adapt a lot of stuff, and even if it's only in like one-off episodes. You know, it's really interesting seeing, you know, other characters like Metallo or Steel. I was really happy to see Steel in this. Or Bizarro. You have all these different characters come in, and there is so much love for the comics in this. Like, it's not all, like, 100% super duper comic accurate. Like, they do make some changes, but they're changes made that for the better. Like, incorporating Brainiac into the fall of Krypton, because that's changed from what his comic book origins were. And it's changed that Brainiac was actually, like, the supercomputer that was running Krypton, who stopped Jor-El from being able to really save the planet. And Brainiac is always a delight to see in this show. Now, I really can't recommend this enough. If you're a fan of Superman, this is an absolute must-watch. If you're not a fan of Superman, and you've never really been a fan seeing other versions, I would say at least give this a try. Because I think that this could really turn some people who maybe don't like him and think he's boring into fans. Now, from here on out, I'm going to be talking about shows that I rewatched in 2022, including one that I actually turned around on after rewatching it. So, The Batman, the 2004 cartoon, is a show I watched as a kid, and I actually had some mixed feelings at the time. And it's funny, after rewatching it, that I have a completely different perspective on the show than I did back when I was a kid watching it. See, when I was a kid and I watched it, and it was very different from what Batman Animated Series had done. And it came off, like, right on the heels of, like, Justice League ending. So there were already some people who were a little bitter about the fact that, oh, well, this show that everyone was, like, absolutely loving ends, and then, or boom, here's a totally different version of Batman. Yeah, okay, I get that. But even as a kid, I was willing to give it a chance, and you know what? I actually liked the fact that it took a completely different approach. It wasn't trying to simply rehash Batman the Animated Series. It wanted to do its own thing. It introduced some of its own new villains. It had some pretty different interpretations of some characters. Like, they actually had Mr. Freeze be a little bit more like his classic counterpart, rather than the more modern version with the tragic backstory with his wife. Yeah, this version of Mr. Freeze was just crazy.
Exercise will keep you warm for only so long.
Oh, Clancy Brown!
Like, he was just a criminal. He's also, in a nice suit. Now, some of the different interpretations didn't quite hit nearly as well. Some of the designs I still think are a little weird. Joker's design, I was...
Speaking of threads, think this is a good look for me? Who are you? Joker.
I'm not as upset about it now as I used to be as a kid, but it's definitely not one of my favorite Joker designs. And the Riddler, goodness gracious, I still don't like the Riddler. He's written fine.
There is a living riddle walking amongst Gotham that everyone wants answered. Who is the Batman? Too easy. Instead, we'll play a game.
Oh, you're gonna love playing shuffleboard in Arkham, Riddler.
Shh. Like, the Riddler in the show is written perfectly fine. His design is just a little, I don't like it. But despite any of those misgivings, I enjoyed the show as a kid. But I remember having a problem when they started sort of moving it towards what people would be familiar with. Right? Because you had a lot of these new villains. You had some very different versions of, classic villains. And then you had Jim Gordon come in. You introduced Barbara as Batgirl. You had Poison Ivy. And you started having more and more of these more familiar elements. And a lot of the stuff that was distinct about the show, you had Chief Rojas. You had Ethan Bennett, who in this version was a childhood friend of Bruce's.
Trespassing is against the law.
Oops. Busted.
Ethan, I see you brought a guest.
My partner.
Hi, I'm Bruce.
You had Detective Ellen Yen.
I'm sure the Batman means well, but he's still a vigilante. And according to the law, Batman, that makes you a criminal.
Who's very clearly named after Ellen Yandel from The Dark Knight Returns. But Detective Yen is actually voiced by Ming-Na Wen, aka the voice of Mulan.
And Joker's in Arkham. So for all we know, this copycat crime is some kind of prank as well.
And she does a great job. But a lot of those elements that were more distinct to the show started to disappear after the first couple of seasons. And that was something I remember as a kid being really annoyed at. And upon rewatching, Detective Yen just up and vanishes the second that Gordon shows up. And it gets weird. Like, a big deal is made about her in the first couple of seasons. She's a major character, and then she just up and vanishes. And I wonder if they were like, well, we have Commissioner Gordon, so why do we need another police character who's also friendly with Batman? Which, come on. You could have them work together. But it's something that does annoy me, but it's not something that is catastrophic, especially because upon rewatching it, I really like the entire run of the show. When I was younger, I didn't like the last few seasons, especially when they were introducing other, Justice League members. You had characters like the Martian Manhunter, you had Green Arrow, you had Superman, these other characters show up. And I remember being really annoyed at that as a kid. And I never finished the last season because I was just so annoyed at that. And upon rewatching it, I don't know what young me was thinking. The last season's fantastic, and the last couple of seasons, because you introduced Robin, in the last couple of seasons, so you have, Batman, Robin, and Batgirl all working together, but they actually mixed it up so that Batgirl became the sidekick first, and then Robin came in afterwards. Which you think, alright, that kind of makes sense, because Barbara has always been a few years older than Dick. So it does kind of make sense that she would start first, and then he would come in after. That's not how it was in the comics, but I do think it's an interesting, different way to handle it. But the last couple of seasons, I think, is where the show really hits its stride. Because you have, the classic trio. You have Batman, Robin, and Batgirl working together, and then you have other heroes who are introduced. And I don't think it overtakes the final season that they include a number of Justice League characters, because you still have your just straight up Batman stories, but then it'll also incorporate other stuff going on, like Penguin finding a Green Lantern ring, or Black Mask using Nth metal. It's interesting when you look at that stuff, because that feels like a comic book. Because when you're reading issues of a comic book, yeah, you could have one issue where it's just Batman fighting Penguin. And then the next issue, you could have Batman and Green Arrow teaming up. And those episodes are still fantastic. I loved seeing those episodes, and I'm kicking myself from when I was a kid seeing those and getting annoyed with it. Yes, we lost Justice League and got this. But it's still great. We even got Lex Luthor coming in.
Ms. Poison Ivy. A fiery little flower. She had the silly notion she could defeat you with this. Plant spores. The mind-controlling variety. Of course, they would never work on you. You're invulnerable to spores and germs and bacteria, unless they were laced with kryptonite dust. At first, I wanted you destroyed. But then when Ms. Ivy came to me at the 11th hour with this, I saw new possibilities.
Oh, Clancy Brown!
Also voiced by Clancy Brown again. Doing a fantastic job and also being a magnificent bastard villain again.
I read your book!
The Batman is a show that I think did not get its fair shake. And a lot of times I've seen some people who are a little more critical of it. And yeah, there are some things to criticize. Like, yeah, you have freaking Ethan Bennett. While he also sort of, fell into the background after the first couple of seasons, he did come back and have some pretty notable stories. But his partner, Detective Yin, is nowhere to be seen. I mean, there's this one episode where you sort of get a flash forward decades into it's like a bad future, really. And they reference Yin.
Oracle!
Way ahead of you, Wingnut. I've alerted Commissioner Yen and Chief Bennett that the pilot's headed their way.
Which means they're still waiting for us to do the heavy lifting, right, Batman?
But that's the only time she gets referenced. Yes, okay, that is a flaw. I do have an issue with that. But the show, I think, did a fantastic job of doing Batman again, but not completely retreading everything that happened in Batman the Animated Series. It had its own identity, its own art style. It had a totally different voice cast. And they do a good job. Rino Romano as Bruce is a fantastic role. Oh my gosh. I feel like the Batman did a good job of stepping out of the shadow of Batman the Animated Series. Because no version is really going to match up in our hearts and our minds to Batman the Animated Series. You can't just be Batman the Animated Series. You have to do your own thing, while still remaining true to what Batman is, and the Batman did that. I do hope we see in the future some more love for the Batman, because it really, absolutely deserves that love. So to talk about a totally different show that definitely doesn't have anything to do with the last one I was talking about.
I lied.
Okay, yeah. I lied. I love Batman, so of course I'm rewatching a lot of Batman stuff. And Beware the Batman is a far more tragic story than The Batman, because Beware the Batman only managed to have one season before it was unceremoniously canceled. Now, the funny thing is back when this show first started, I think around was it 2011, 2012? Around that time. When I first saw it, I didn't like the art style. I thought it looked awkward. I didn't really like some of the interpretations of the characters from what I had seen in the promos. I was ready to completely write off this show. But I am still a Batman fan. So I felt compelled to check it out and watch some of the episodes. Just to see a few of the first episodes. To see what it was like. And I even was sort of writing up my thoughts on each episode, and after a few episodes, I realized, you know what? I like Beware the Batman. Sure, it's different, but like I just said with The Batman, like you can't just do what everyone loved in, Batman the Animated Series. You kind of have to do your own thing. And Beware the Batman did that. As a matter of fact, it did something that I don't see nearly enough in Batman media, and actually focused on aspects of Bruce that are oftentimes forgotten. Not just him being a detective, but also showing his intelligence. Like when Tatsu, who is Katana, a hero in the DC universe, who's also a member of the Outsiders, comes in, she's actually basically acting as his sidekick in this show, which is a really interesting mix-up. No one would expect Katana to come in as Bruce's sidekick in this. But in this show, they establish that she has sort of a father-daughter relationship with Alfred. And in the first scene that they're all interacting together, Bruce deducts their relationship by seeing how they act. He pulls a full Sherlock Holmes. And he's like noticing her body language and the way she's speaking and stuff. And he's acting, it's like he pinpoints how their relationship is.
But the Major's been taking good care of me.
Major? Is that something you called Alfred as a child?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Oh, he didn't tell me. It's just a little trick of mine. I find in business it's helpful to learn to read people quickly. Whenever you call Alfred Major, your voice lowers and you unconsciously look up. The same way a child would look up to an adult. If I was to guess, Alfred worked with a member of your family when you were a child. Your father?
Quite amazing, Mr. Wayne. My father and Alfred did work together. They were partners.
And yes! Batman is the world's greatest detective. So I love the idea that they're pulling some of these aspects that are more seen in like Sherlock Holmes and applying them to Batman. Yes, he's a detective!
I see crime. A waiter stealing from the register. There's a cheating husband who's removed his wedding ring. And a pickpocket on the street, lifting a wallet from a woman's purse. You need to train your mind to let your instincts tell you when something is wrong.
When do you turn it off?
I don't. I can't.
And I also love the fact that they acknowledge that he visits his villains in, prison.
Magpie, how are you? Sorry I haven't been to see you recently.
I was worried something had happened to you. I've missed our talks. Anything I should know?
I'm fine.
Yes! An often overlooked and often forgotten aspect of Bruce is the fact that he actually genuinely does care about the people that he's fighting. Yes, okay, he has to punch the Joker in the face and lock him up again. But, a lot of these antagonists he has in his rogues gallery are a lot of people who have genuinely messed up lives. And they're not inherently incapable of, redemption, except for certain people like Joker. But, yeah, the idea that Batman is going into the prison and he's talking to them, even just bringing that up is more than a lot of other versions have done. Yes, in good versions of Batman, and you do see this in stuff like Batman the Animated Series, that if there's someone in need, Bruce will help them out. And sure, he may have to do it in a sneaky way, but he'll do what he can to help people out, even if they're criminals. And we see this in even The Batman. There's a storyline. I don't want to spoil this because it's in a later season. But, there is one where you see a character who actually does have some problems that Bruce is continually trying to help him out. Get him a job, trying to make sure that he's getting his life on track. And this is something that's so important that a lot of people just completely overlook. Because it's cool that he is a master of martial arts, that he kicks butt. That's great. That's cool. I remember liking that as a kid as well, and I, to this day, still like it. That's the reason why I got into martial arts in the first place when I was younger, because I wanted to be like Batman. But there's more to Batman than just fighting people. And I loved that Beware the Batman touched on this stuff. And they kind of even have this bit of a running subplot going on where Bruce is basically making some blatantly unhealthy decisions. And he's trying to, make himself a more efficient crime fighter. He's pushing himself, to the physical limit. He's downing these health drinks that look like toxic sludge just because they're full of nutrients.
What's that smell?
It's Parajat bark.
How's that even on the menu?
I own this restaurant.
He's cutting down his sleep to just a couple of hours a night because he wants to have more time to fight crime. When people want to talk about Bruce's self-destructive behavior, I don't like the whole, I don't work with anyone. I hate all of my allies and my friends and the people who help me. Those are always stupid. The real self-destructive stuff that they should focus on is the fact that Bruce actually does have an unhealthy obsession with how he fights crime. He does this at his own detriment consistently because he is so intense about wanting to stop any other 8-year-old child from ever suffering the pain and hardships that he went through, that he is willing to basically destroy himself in order to do that. And even if they don't go heavy on it in Beware the Batman, just bringing this up that he's doing these very clearly self-destructive things and pushing himself when he should be pulling back and taking a break is great. I love that. That doesn't mean that the entire show is perfect. I like quite a lot of it. There's a couple of these. Okay, alright. There's really one issue I have, and that's really the only one that is consistent across the entire show, is that they introduced this nerdy scientist guy, and he kind of feels like a one-off character that stuck around way longer than he should. And he's just, I never really liked him. I always thought he was just kind of annoying. But really, after rewatching the show, he's really the one thing that I don't like. They do make some other notable changes, especially when they bring in mother effing Deathstroke. I remember when I first saw Deathstroke in the show, and I saw that he has 2 eyes, and I was just like, oh no! Oh no! Because we all know what's going to happen. So even though his backstory is pretty different from Deathstroke in like the comics, I actually do like this version. You know, and it's one of those things you just have to understand. This is a different version. He's still Deathstroke the Terminator. But, you know, they don't have his whole backstory with his kids and stuff. At least as far as I'm aware. But yeah, he is different, and they do actually tie his backstory to Alfred, which is interesting. Which, I mean, okay, I guess that makes sense. Alfred was a former spy. And talking about, you know, Deathstroke, one of the things that Beware the Batman does is it almost exclusively focuses on, like, C and D list antagonists. And that sounds weird at first, because Anarchy is a character who's been around since the 80s, but most people don't know who he is. I mean, you have Professor Pig, Magpie. These are a lot of characters who, yeah, they've existed, but they're not exactly at the top of the list. But to be fair, even a lot of characters like Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy weren't exactly considered A-list villains either in Batman before Batman the Animated Series. Mr. Freeze especially. Like, holy crap, he was rocketed to one of the greatest Batman antagonists. I wouldn't even call him an outright villain. He's one of the most iconic members of his rogues gallery because of Batman the Animated Series. And frankly, I like that there are some characters that Beware the Batman introduced to me that I honestly hadn't really heard of. It really does help give the show its own identity. And whenever they do bring in an iconic character, like, oh, alright, you have characters like Lady Shiva or Ra's al Ghul, and hell, you know, even building up to Harvey Dent's character, because you see Harvey Dent as Harvey Dent in this. This is before he becomes Two-Face. They had a lot of self-control when it came to using a lot of the more iconic members of the Rogues Gallery. They kind of treated those characters as, you know, ones you really build up to. And sure, while he's fighting these more obscure villains, then okay, alright, you want to build up to Two-Face, alright, that's eventually going to happen. And okay, we got the League of Assassins, and this is going to come in. You're not going to be dealing with Ra's al Ghul immediately, but, you know, you're going to have these run-ins, you're going to have to build up to that. That's actually really interesting. I actually really like that. And it's sad that this show was cut off at 1 season, because I really wanted to see where they were going to keep going with this, especially because the end of the show heavily implies that it's leading into Batman and the Outsiders.
Not just me. We. I'm not alone.
Yeah, the Outsiders are a bunch of characters who, frankly, a lot of like the mainstream audiences don't even know. And it brings in, of course, other characters that are more classic characters like Jim Gordon and Barbara Gordon. But they actually focus on Barbara's, like, intelligence and her computer skills first. So they're more setting her up to be Oracle from the start, rather than being Batgirl.
I was thinking about giving myself a code name. Something mysterious, like
Oracle.
Now, whether they were going to have her eventually become Batgirl, or she would just exclusively be Oracle, and then they would bring in someone like Cassandra Cain, who is the daughter of Lady Shiva, who appears in the show. And, you know, she was also a member of the Outsiders, so maybe they would have brought in Cassandra Cain at some point to be the first Batgirl in this continuity. We don't know. And that's the sad part, is there was so much potential for this show, and it got axed almost immediately. And it really sucks because I remember I was so against this show at first. I gave it a chance, I actually ended up really liking it, and then it got canceled. It sucks. But at least I had a good time rewatching it. So the first movie I want to talk about is actually a movie that I slept on when it first came out, and I really wish I didn't. Oz the Great and Powerful is an interesting movie. It was directed by Sam Raimi, and it was a prequel to the story of the Wizard of Oz, where you actually follow the Wizard of Oz as he first arrives, and he sees the crazy world around him, and he deals with, you know, witches and stuff. It's not something that specifically really ties into the other version, but it is kind of its own thing how it interprets things. It's actually really interesting to see because it obviously takes a lot of cues from the original Wizard of Oz movie, which is how a lot of people like know it rather than the books, but it also does incorporate some aspects from the books into the movie. But the movie also actually does a different take on the origin for the Wicked Witch. Now I admit, when the movie first came out, I wasn't interested in it at all, but watching it, it's actually pretty good. It is really its own thing, like I said, but it actually is a pretty good story about a man who is a pretty flawed and selfish person and coming in and actually sort of becoming a hero. There's a few odd things in it that if you're familiar with like the older versions, that it seems a little weird, like a romance between, you know, the Wizard of Oz and Glinda the Good Witch. But it actually is cool to see this sort of more expansive view on the Wizard of Oz compared to what the movie, because the original movie and the original book was pretty straightforward in a lot of aspects. Now, the lore on the Wizard of Oz, when you get into the books, there's like a bajillion different books. There's like so much ridiculous lore and all these characters. It's actually pretty wild. And this movie only touches on a little bit of it, but it actually is really interesting because I have a rewrite of the show Ruby, and in Ruby there's a lot of inspirations from the Wizard of Oz, so I looked to the Wizard of Oz as inspiration, and I actually did check out a lot of these different, you know, books and stuff and find out a lot more about it. So it's actually really interesting watching The Great and Powerful Oz and actually saying, oh yeah, there's a few little details here that, you know, oh, this is like referencing the books. James Franco actually plays the wizard, and Mila Kunis is actually the Wicked Witch of the West. And it's actually funny because she was really into it. She was like shockingly into doing this role, and she did a really good job, especially when she is the full-blown Wicked Witch of the West. Like, she owns it. It's actually pretty crazy. Sam Raimi is known for having a particular style when he does stuff, and he's very, very good at doing, you know, stuff that can be serious, and very, very good at camp. And I feel like a lot of that bled into The Wizard of Oz, because Sam Raimi's style is perfect for the Land of Oz, especially when you have little nice touches. Because when he first comes into Oz, they mimic the original movie, because the original movie was colored. It was, you know, black and white in the beginning, and then when they go to Oz, it's, you know, all colorful. They actually mimic that, not just with black and white, but also by having a regular 4:3 ratio for the beginning, and then when they go to Oz, it's not just colorful, it widens, and you can actually see, oh, well, now it's the full screen. It's really cool. There's a lot of neat little details in this. And all the sets and all the different ways they handled stuff and the way they incorporated things and built in CGI and, you know, actual practical sets. It's actually really cool. And I know this movie gets dogged on by a lot of people, and I remember back when it came out, this is one of the reasons why I didn't watch it at first, is because it did get dogged on. And I'm like, no. Give this movie a chance. Because if you like Wizard of Oz, even just in general, this is actually a really cool interpretation to see. I don't really want to like spoil the whole movie, but I do highly recommend checking this movie out. Now, the next movie I want to talk about is a certified 90s classic.
There is a new enemy, freaks of nature. Together, we will punish these creatures.
What the heck was that?
Looked like sort of a big turtle in a trench coat.
Yeah! I love being a turtle!
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are an iconic series, and I've loved the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series since I was a kid. I still have my old beach towel of the 80s cartoon show that I grew up with. You know, it's funny because I hadn't watched the 90s movies in a while. I mean, I watched them obviously as a kid, but you know, I hadn't watched it really since the 90s. So actually watching it, you know, in modern time, man, it's just a slap of nostalgia. It's actually really interesting when you look at the franchise as a whole, how it's sort of evolved over time, and how different versions and adaptations added different aspects to it. Like, obviously you had the original comic, and when that was adapted into the 80s show, they kidified a lot of stuff, they toned down a lot of the darker aspects of it. But what the 80s show did is it actually gave each turtle a signature color, and that color has been consistent all the way to now. And in the movie, the original 90s movie, they actually did a little bit more. There's a few aspects of it that were added, in particular, like Raphael have their origins in this movie, especially with Raph being like, you know, the big tough guy, you know, gotta have that accent.
A Jose Canseco bat? Tell me, you didn't pay money for this.
Well, a lot of that stuff has its origins in the 90s movie. It really is actually impressive, not just how they captured the feel of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but also how they had guys in these big suits actually manage to fight, and it doesn't look too bad. It's funny, because you would think that if these guys are in these big suits, you know, to look like the Turtles, you think it would actually make them be like, oh, they'd be fighting like the old Star Trek series. But no, they actually managed to do it quite well. Like, this is really good practical effects for the Turtles.
Though Jim Henson, the guy behind the Muppets, worked on the turtle suits, which probably explains why they're so good.
The old 90s movie is really fun, and really, they actually had some pretty gosh darn good casting too. Casey especially, they got a guy who's just perfect for the role.
Each character, especially with the voices of the Turtles and Splinter, are all really good. And speaking of Casey, his portrayal here, despite not having all of the history and backstory that he has in other versions, does him really well.
It's a talent.
He's also a lot smarter than he would seem at first, especially when you see that he's actually really good at fixing cars. He has this great friendship with Donatello of all the turtles in this movie, especially when they're bonding over fixing a truck while insulting each other in alphabetical order.
See how this transplant worked. Fungoid.
What are we on?
G.
Here goes, Gackface.
I do like the fact that a lot of these different aspects that got added were like eventually sort of combined, and especially when you get to like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2003, the cartoon, where a lot of those aspects are brought in, and even though they follow a lot of aspects from the comics, and they also kind of do their own thing, different aspects from the 80s show and the 90s movies, they did kind of get melded in. So the 90s movie is really, in a lot of ways, one of the foundational aspects of the Turtles franchise. Now, while it is also pretty goofy, it is more serious than the 80s cartoon which preceded it. So even back in the 90s, they were already kind of moving back away from the more like really, really lighthearted stuff from the cartoon into stuff that was actually a little closer to the comics, but obviously it was still an overall lighthearted movie.
Hey, what the? Whoa! And I thought
thought insurance salesmen were pushy.
I was really glad to rewatch it after all these years, because the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has been a series that's been very near and dear to my heart since I was a little kid. And it's funny, I didn't really appreciate the movie as much as a kid. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, as a kid, you see turtles fighting and you're like, cool! Turtles doing ninja stuff! But as an adult, I actually do have a greater appreciation for it. And especially its overall placement within the Turtles franchise. Really, any fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles needs to watch that original 90s movie. And the second one is good too, but I really like the original 90s movie. Now the next movie to talk about is one of my favorite Ghibli movies.
There's no one who can stop me from killing her.
Princess of Beasts, if it's me you want, here I am.
I dream of when I will finally crunch that woman's head in my jaws.
But even that wouldn't end the killing now, would it?
Look, everyone! This is what hatred looks like! This is what it does when it catches hold of you!
You're on their side, you always were!
No! What I want is for the humans in the forest to live in peace!
It's your fate to go there and see with eyes unclouded by hate.
Princess Mononoke is a fascinating movie. Now, I, as an American, who especially grew up in the 90s, was bombarded with messages of saving nature and saving the rainforest and Captain Planet. And, it's one of those things that's just really tiring. Like, every time I start to see a green ace up in something, my first reaction is to go, here we go again. But sometimes it's able to be done well. And Princess Mononoke is one of the few times I think an actual message about, protecting nature has actually not just been done good, but done amazingly. Oftentimes, one of the biggest pitfalls that a lot of these media that are promoting nature tend to fall into is sort of a mankind / machinery / industry bad, and then nature all good, and you kind of end up losing something in that process. But Princess Mononoke doesn't fall into that. It is probably the most even-handed I have ever seen in one of these pieces of media. Because it doesn't say that technology bad or humanity bad. There are characters who believe that, but they are shown to be wrong. In fact, the big point of the movie is not, humanity should stop building stuff and should just live in the forest. It's, no, there needs to be a balance. Because humanity is part of nature. It's not that humanity should never build anything. It's that humanity should be smarter about how they build stuff. They should be more in tune with nature, instead of trying to fight nature, to work with it. And that does also mean that they can build stuff. But it's not just, nature good, because it shows that nature can be very bad. Nature can be cruel. So the animal creatures, including the animal gods, are not infallible, and some of them are actually quite wrong and very, very nasty. And some of the animals have even become outright corrupt because of their anger towards the humans. And in the humans, they've become greedy. They're taking too much. They're stripping lands that used to be bountiful forests all for one town. But the movie doesn't say, no, humans should just either completely leave or they should all just live in nature. No. In fact, the movie even makes a point that humanity will rebuild and the forest will regrow. But it's about understanding that both of them are part of one system. Instead of trying to fight and overpower one or the other, it says that they should work together. And as hard as that can be, and as hard as it may be to see people that you have hated, or see stuff that you've been fighting for years, it's important and it's the most beneficial to everyone to work together. Humanity can use stuff. They can use trees to build stuff, as long as they're not wiping out the entire forest. And the animals can't just go and kill humans just because they're there. Because something that's a big point of the movie is that Humans are a part of nature. They're not the invaders. Humanity is part of the great ecosystem. It's like when it comes to the main god in the movie. It's why whenever the animals wanted to just get rid of the humans, he doesn't. Because he's not here to, take sides. He's here to be a part of nature. And humans are a part of that. And it's so fascinating to see this approach. Because really, you don't see a lot of this. Oftentimes you end up with Captain Planet style things where the villains are, wahaha, I can't wait to cut down the rainforest and then burn the trees for no reason, wahaha. Ooh, I can't wait to just dump oil in the ocean. Stuff like that is so... First off, it's uninteresting in terms of just writing. But it's just also not true. It's not just about being evil or being greedy just for the sake of it. Yes, those things exist, but the message should never be, oh, industry bad. No, we should never have industry. It's like, yeah, our world functions on it. But the point is to say, yeah, don't take too much. Don't take more than you really need. Take what you need, and everyone can live in harmony. And so apart from the fact that it's also a really entertaining movie, the core of it is this theme about nature versus humanity, about how it's not really about who should win, but how they should work together. And this is exemplified in the fact that the main character, Ashitaka, is not taking sides. He's actually from a little village which does live in peace with nature. So when he goes out, he actually has a more neutral stance. So he's not deeply involved with a lot of the stuff that humanity is going on, and he's not directly involved with all of the stuff that's going on with nature and the conflict with humanity. He comes in as a neutral third party. He's not here to take sides because, as they show, both sides have good parts to them. Because you have, San, who is taken in by the wolves. Even though she's a human and she really doesn't quite belong in there, she was still taken in by the wolves and raised by them. And you look at humanity, especially Lady Eboshi, and how even though she, on the surface, seems like an evil, conquering warlord, you find out that she's actually got a very, very good heart to her. She helps the people that no one else will. She goes and saves prostitutes and lepers and gives them a place to live and a place to just work and be able to contribute to society and not be looked down on or hated. So you can't just say that one side is all good and one side is all bad. And I really like that because it makes an effort to humanize both sides. All too often it can be very easy for a writer to fall into humanizing one side, but the other side doesn't get any of that. So this is how you end up with Captain Planet. You have just evil bad guys who are evil bad guys because they're evil bad guys and they just do evil things. It's really not how it is. It's very cartoonish. But Princess Mononoke says, no. Both sides have good things and both sides have bad things about them. And everyone needs to understand that they're all a part of one system. Basically, they're all part of the circle of life. But that is important, and in the end, it comes down to them realizing that, okay, we were doing something wrong, but we should try to do this again, but better. And that's what I really love about that movie, because it takes something that I have been bombarded with since I was a little kid. Something that annoys me on sight just because, yes, I understand. I don't want the rainforest to be burned down. Like, I want animals to not go extinct. Yes, I get it. You don't need to bombard me a million times, with all of this. And it takes that, and it actually says, okay, all right, here's that same message, but done in a mature and thoughtful and even-handed way. So even if you don't like environmental messaging in media, I highly recommend Princess Mononoke because I think it does it the best that I've ever seen it done in a movie. So to move on to something a little less serious. The Street Fighter 2 movie is wild! Now, obviously, Street Fighter 2 didn't really have much of an actual story. It had sort of individual stories, right? Like, you had Guile, who had his whole deal with trying to avenge his friend. You had Chun-Li, who had her issue with Bison. But they never really had an overarching plot. And it really wouldn't be until later, games and supplementary materials where they tried to expand on stuff with more proper stories and more lore. So Street Fighter 2, the movie, didn't really have a lot to work from. And it kind of shows, but it's also kind of awesome. Now, if you were trying to go from a strict adherence to all of the lore, they messed up a few things. Like Cammy not being British. You have a lot of these different things that because I'm a fan of Street Fighter, so I notice a lot of this stuff. But I don't know. It's just such a ridiculous movie that I can't really be angry that they didn't get all the stuff accurate, especially because you have all of these different characters. Because they managed to fit almost the entire cast of Street Fighter 2 into this movie in some way, shape, or form. Even if they're just there for a little bit, they still show up. You have some good fights, and this also includes, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have seen GIFs of it, the fight between Chun-Li and Vega, which is an iconic and fantastic fight. The action in this movie is really good, so even if the story is a little absurd, and you can tell they were just kind of inventing their own things with stuff to do in this movie because the game wasn't exactly providing them with a full-on plot to follow. And even though it is a lot of, okay, here's a character from the game who just kind of pops up and they have a fight. I don't know. It's just so charming. It's also wild because this movie can also be a little not kid-friendly. There are several times when they just flat out swear. And not even just like, oh, what the hell? Like, not even mild stuff like that, like actual swearing.
I don't give a shit. If her job's finished, she's finished.
And the animators must have gotten really horny because there's an entire shower sequence with Chun-Li which shows the tatas. Yeah, when I watched it for the first time, I was just like, what? Like, not even just in the shower, like, they actually show them. Then she puts on some clothes, and then the fight with Vega happens. It's just really funny that these weirdly adult things that just pop up out of nowhere, then they go back to being goofy. And it's like, you have some, like, wild scenes where it's like, oh, well, Cammy comes out of nowhere and she's brainwashed. Though I don't know if they had established the brainwashing in the games, because she used to be a part of, like, a group brainwashed by Bison. I don't know if they had established that in the games, because I think that was established in Alpha. Because Cammy's brainwashed to go and just kill a dude, and
I love the kind of woman that will actually just kill me. I really hope some hot chick paints my brains all over some fucking hallway. I'm talking full-on watermelon in the thighs level carnage.
God, I wish that were me. And what's also funny is that that's basically Cammy's only contribution to the story. Outside of this, she's not really involved at all. And it's like, yeah, I understand, because when it came to who's going to be the main characters, it's obviously you have Ryu and Ken, and then you have Chun-Li and Guile. They're basically the main characters. So other ones like Dalsim and Honda just kind of show up at times. But it's like, hey, right? It's not trying to be super serious. It's got a very cheesy plot. So it's not like it's like a super ultra serious drama and then wacky stuff happens. It's like, you know what? It's Street Fighter. Like, there's a lot of goofy stuff in this, but it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, even though it's not accurate to a lot of the lore, and to be fair, some of that lore did come after the fact, but even though it's not super accurate to that, even though it can be, like, weirdly, hilariously, like, adult at times, where Bison just starts swearing, I had so much fun with this movie. It's a wild ride, but it's a wild ride in a good way, right? It's kind of like how you watch the live-action Ace Attorney movie, which is crazy and just not really accurate to the games, but it's just such a ridiculous time that it's like, you know what, I enjoy it. And the Street Fighter 2 animated movie, it's a good time. And it's got some good fight scenes. So even if you just want action, you're going to get plenty of action and plenty of good action with it. So the next one is probably going to be the most contentious choice in this section. But it's a movie that I actually really liked. Yes, Jurassic World Dominion. I watched it, and I liked it. I don't really care if that's a hot take, but I like the Jurassic World movies. The first one is fine. I'm not really super invested in it. I really liked Fallen Kingdom. Really did something different after so many years, and especially after the first movie was basically a modern rendition of the original movie. Fallen Kingdom really did do a lot of different stuff, along with the fact that it gave us dinosaur gothic, which is not really an aesthetic I expected I needed, but the movie showed me that I needed it anyway. And Dominion finishes up the Jurassic World trilogy in what I feel is a pretty satisfying way. One thing I really like about these movies, and especially because of Colin Trevorrow, is that he listens to criticism. Colin Trevorrow has never once, despite the fact that he's gotten a lot of hate for the movies, has never once fired back at fans. He's not gotten into arguments, he has not made passive-aggressive snipes at them, and he hasn't done stuff in the movies to spite them. In fact, he's listened to criticism quite often. One of the biggest criticisms of the first Jurassic World movie is there was too much CGI. There was not enough practical effects. So going forward, with Fallen Kingdom and in Dominion, you have a lot more practical effects. In fact, there are even some scenes where you can tell they had full animatronics that they're interacting with. And in Dominion, there's a part where Chris Pratt grabs a smaller dino and he's like trying to wrangle with it. And it's an actual like animatronic puppet. And he grabs it and you can see it. It's like when people talk about that, being able to see that it's real. I'm like, yeah. Yeah, and the sequels really do that. They're still CGI, obviously. But it's not entirely CGI for all of the dinos. And in one of the things that people criticized, especially in, Fallen Kingdom, where it's like, hey, you had Owen and Claire, like, they got together in the first movie, and then they broke up in between movies just so they can get back together again. That's stupid, and it's lazy, and people don't really like seeing that. And in Dominion, nope, there's no relationship drama. They're just together. So there's none of that, ooh, we were exes, and, then we get back together because we actually do love each other. No, they're just together. And especially in Fallen Kingdom, because Jeff Goldblum had a cameo as Ian Malcolm, where he bookends the movie. He literally has a scene in the beginning and a scene at the end, and that's it. I mean, they're good scenes, and he's in character, but it's not much. Jeff Goldblum obviously wanted to do more, and fans wanted more of the old characters, so what does Dominion do? It brings back the old cast. So you have Grant, Ellie, and Malcolm all back and all doing stuff. And it's really funny to me that Jurassic World Dominion did what the Star Wars sequels refused to do, which was actually allow the old cast to get together. Because in Jurassic World Dominion, you have, Malcolm and Ellie and Grant all involved in their own story that's running parallel to the characters from the first two Jurassic World movies. So you have them doing stuff, and what's really great is this shouldn't be so impressive, but in the modern times where classic characters are often beaten down, insulted, deconstructed, and or killed off, all three of them are highly respected. Grant's doing what he always does, but he's a highly respected older figure. People look at him with respect. There's no derision, there's no insults, and the occasional boomer joke with him not knowing technology, which, to be fair, is totally in character from the original movie.
I hate computers.
But he comes in, he works with Ellie, who's also highly respected in her field. with Malcolm, who's super successful, written books, does classes, does speeches, goes to shows, and he's making tons of money to take care of. I think he's got like 5 kids or something. So it's like, yeah, so all 3 of them are successful. And when they meet up with the newer characters, there's no, competition to see who's better. It's just they work together. And in some cases, you actually get to see the knowledge that they've gained from the older movies in effect. When Owen and Grant are going down to this area and looking for a dino, Grant is checking his peripherals, because that's something from the first movie of these dinos that can be smart and might ambush you. So he's making sure to check his sides and make sure that they're not sneaking up on them.
Watch the sides. They always come from the sides.
Like, yeah, and you even have a moment with Malcolm actually doing something from the original movie, but more effectively, because he learned from what happened. So they show these characters all being smart, all being intelligent, and all being competent. It's so refreshing! So not only do you have the original cast, reuniting, you even have them working with the new characters alongside them, not against them. There's no beating them down to show the new characters are better. Just the old characters are more experienced, and that's acknowledged. It's even funny because Claire and Ellie end up having this kind of a cheesy girl power moment. And I don't mean like a girl boss moment. They don't come in here to show up the guys. There's this moment when they get surrounded by bugs and they're like, batting all these big bugs and stuff. And the funny thing about it is that it makes me think of those cheesy girl power moments from the 90s. The whole girls can do it too kind of a thing. It didn't feel like it was a condescending thing for, like, to show the men up. It's just, the girls have a moment and that's it. There's nothing else to it. It's nice to see these characters be respected. And even there's a couple of new characters, and they're just kind of there to help out with the story for the most part, but they're nice, and I don't really mind their additions. They're side characters. You have the Jurassic World characters, you've got the classic characters, and then you have these new characters who are just kind of there helping out. They don't overtake anything. But what's also really nice, and it's something that shows Colin Trevorrow knows the fans, is that they actually, because they obviously can't just retcon Jurassic Park 3 out of existence, but they actually have Ellie have gotten divorced from that husband that she had married for Jurassic Park 3 that no one liked. And then they actually address the fact that Grant and Ellie should have gotten together. And they do. In this movie, they actually get together, which is something fans have been wanting for many years. Which is, this movie, I feel, is the most one that is for fans. Because Colin Trevorrow clearly listens. And even though people hated him, some people have called him a hack, said he's worse than Rian Johnson, but no. He listens to fans and he cares. He wants to do things that people would like. This is why his version of the episode 9 of the Star Wars sequels was something that had, like, Luke training Rey and her getting a double-bladed lightsaber and stuff that fans would like more than, frankly, the crap that they had gotten. So even though Colin Trevorrow is not perfect, he has the best attitude with fans, and I feel like that should at least be acknowledged to say, yes, Colin Trevorrow respects the fans. And it's also really funny is that there's also a moment where Ian Malcolm sees Owen, taking care of a dinosaur, and Malcolm is just like, really? You're doing this? This is a thing? And Owen's like, yeah. And Malcolm is just like, you're crazy.
A baby raptor? And you gave her a name. How about that?
And, and it's funny, because that's absolutely, because Ian Malcolm's been through all this before plenty of times, so he just looks at this guy taking care of a dinosaur, and he's just like, freaking weirdo. And one thing that I think really kind of shows that, Colin Trevorrow was really listening to the criticisms is that Dr. Wu, who was in the original movie, he was working on, stuff at Jurassic World, but he kind of came off as a bit of a mad scientist, which a lot of people weren't as big of a fan on. in Fallen Kingdom, he shows that he understands, like, there's ways you need to do things. You can't just be cruel and stuff. So he's still kind of a mad scientist, but he's better. He's not an inhuman person, but he's still working with the bad guys. But in Dominion, what they do is they actually show that he is, because of what he has done and the research that he's done, he's actually contributed to things going badly. He actually regrets all of it, and he ends up wanting to turn around and help the heroes. So, even though people were critical of how Dr. Wu was handled, they took that portrayal that wasn't as popular, and they turned it into a character arc. That Dr. Wu had kind of lost his way. He had become consumed by the science. He was concerned with what he could do, not what he should do, basically. And in the end, he realizes that he had really made mistakes and does everything he can to help out. He's really, really at his wit's end. He really realizes that he had done wrong. And it's nice to see that they listen, instead of just having him be like, oh, a bad guy for no reason, they actually listened and say, okay, so they incrementally changed his character. They didn't just snap a finger and suddenly make him into a good guy, but like, they actually showed that he had development over the movies, and he ends up in a nice spot at the end of Dominion. Dominion, look, I know a lot of people have criticized Dominion, but I really like Jurassic World Dominion, and I really feel like this did for Jurassic Park what the sequels refused to do for Star Wars. You know, getting back the old cast, letting them work together, giving them like one final hurrah in the movie to work together and be heroes. And I don't know, it's just a movie that I actually really enjoy. So the final movie I want to talk about is one that I am quite fond of.
Until a cure can be found. Until then, my love, we'll be here together.
We're going to finish this! You're insane!
Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero is an absolutely fantastic Batman movie. And personally, if you ask me, I think it's the best Batman movie, period. Yes, I like it even more than Mask of the Phantasm. Because while I like Mask of the Phantasm, and it's a great story, I've mentioned this before, but I don't like it when the Joker is given a backstory. So even if that movie is only kind of touching the idea of, oh yeah, he's basically like, was like a mob hitman, you know, back in the day, I don't like it. And it's the only blemish on an otherwise masterpiece of a movie. But for Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero, I have no reservations in saying that I absolutely adore this movie. And I actually had gotten this signed by Kevin Conroy several years ago. I had not rewatched Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero for a while. And rewatching it in 2022, I was struck by just how much I loved it. I love Batman the Animated Series. I love Batman the Animated Series so much. I grew up with it. I've rewatched it many times over the years. What I really love about Sub-Zero is what it does with the characters. Batman the Animated Series has been well known for doing a lot of good stuff with the characters, but none more so than with Mr. Freeze. And what I really like about this movie, even opposed to Mask of the Phantasm or any other animated Batman movie, is that it works perfectly well as like a finale to Batman the Animated Series. You know, obviously ignoring anything else in the DCAU because there's more Batman content. But like if you're looking at Batman the Animated Series, Sub-Zero is a perfect conclusion. And what I love about it is not only is it a good movie, but they decide to focus on something that is very distinct to Batman the Animated Series. The version of Mr. Freeze that they created was a complete reinvention of the character that took a villain that no one really cared about and turned him into one of the most iconic members of Batman's Rogues Gallery. to the point where that backstory that they came up with has become the new standard for Mr. Freeze. So it just makes sense that this last movie for Batman the Animated Series and the last piece of material that was done in the old animation style focuses on Mr. Freeze. But what I also really like about it is that it allows a few things to progress. Now, because of the episodic nature of Batman the Animated Series, they didn't really progress a whole lot. There's a lot of times where characters would have stuff that's introduced and it would be gone by the end of the episode. Different relationships and developments and stuff that would go away after the end of the episode because, well, it had to be episodic. So while there were certain continuations of characters who came back and stuff, for the most part, there was never anything big that was allowed to disrupt the status quo. Characters couldn't have too many changes in their relationships. They couldn't have too much different happen. But because this is a movie, and it's really the last piece of classic The Animated Series material they had, they were actually able to make some significant changes, including actually having Dick and Barbara be in a relationship. It's something the Animated Series kind of toyed with, but they never really committed to anything. Especially as, like, in the comics, Dick and Barbara, especially around this era, were a thing. So having Dick and Barbara actually be in a relationship, and an official relationship, not just, oh, they kind of have a thing where they kind of flirt, like an actual relationship. It's actually being taken seriously. It was actually really great to see. And this relationship is even worked into the story and connected to the Mr. Freeze story. Especially because Barbara is taken so that he can find a way to heal his wife, Nora. The best way I can describe this movie is that it feels like a really good episode of Batman the Animated Series. And considering Mr. Freeze's first episode is an absolute masterpiece, that's high praise. It really does feel like if you had like 3 or 4 episodes strung together for one story, that's what Sub-Zero is. And it does a really good job of capping off Mr. Freeze's story. Again, ignoring anything afterwards, because of course there's more story with Mr. Freeze after this, but I feel like this is a great way to really end it, especially at the very end when Bruce is able to actually find a cure for Nora and actually help her. So Mr. Freeze finally gets what he wants, and he can be happy in the knowledge that his wife was saved. And it's like, this movie is so good. This movie, there's a reason why it's Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero, because really, this movie is centered around Mr. Freeze. There's some stuff with Batman. It's not like he goes through any major character development. Mask of the Phantasm has a lot more character development and delving into Bruce's story. Bruce doesn't really have anything like this, except for the fact that he was basically helping Mr. Freeze finally attain the goal he'd been working for many years, is trying to find a way to save Nora. Now, I'm pretty well known as being a pretty picky Batman fan, and that even in a lot of stuff that a lot of people like, I can find things to criticize, but I really don't have much in the way of criticisms for Sub-Zero. It's just a really good movie. It does good with the characters. It does great with Mr. Freeze, and it finishes off his story from the animated series in a way that is absolutely perfect. You get to see a lot of Dick in action too, especially in the scene where he's chasing Mr. Freeze to save Barbara, and he has this great motorcycle chase. So while it wasn't a full theatrical release like Mask of the Phantasm, you can tell they really put that budget to good use. I could really just go on and on and on praising Sub-Zero because I love this movie so much. It's really, I think, my favorite Batman movie, period, of all time. Even more than Mask of the Phantasm, even more than Under the Red Hood. I really like Sub-Zero. And for a lot of fans of Batman Animated Series who may not have seen it or may not have watched it in a very long time, I highly recommend checking it out. Because while Mask of the Phantasm is great, and it is rightfully held in very high regards by many people as one of the best, if not the best, Batman movie of all time, I'd like to see some more love for Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero. Because it absolutely deserves it. So, this is something that was obviously on my mind quite a bit. Because, and I've talked about Kevin Conroy quite a bit in this. But obviously, as a lot of people know, in 2022, Kevin Conroy passed away. Lost his battle with cancer. I grew up watching Batman the Animated Series as a little kid. I loved Batman. I've always loved Batman. And Kevin Conroy, to me, is the definitive Batman voice. I know he is to many people. But personally, I was hit really hard by the announcement that he had passed away. And I wanted to... There's nothing I can really say really kind of captures how I feel about it, because this hit me harder than a lot of celebrity deaths. Because it's just... Kevin Conroy has always been like the Batman to me, the guy who represents Batman. His voice is perfect, and like, I met him at a convention. I had him sign my copy of Sub-Zero. This absolute nice guy, a man who knows Batman. So I wanted to do a little tribute to him for the end of this video.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman!
Surprised to see me? A little. I'm more surprised that I lived so long.
Batman, Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne, Batman. Or have you met?
Not now.
You become what you've always fought against. And I will stop you.
I've got some things to say. I should have said them when you were here, but... Despite our differences, I have nothing but respect for you. I hope you know that.
John Grayson, the circus manager. Can I help you?
He has this scene at his parents' grave where he's begging with them to release him from his vow.
But I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
Because he's fallen in love for the first time in his life with Andrea Beaumont, and he didn't think he'd ever be able to love.
Please. Tell me that it's okay.
And he's breaking down. And that scene, I loved that scene, and I loved playing it. And I was really proud of it. Because you have to show the humanity of the man.
Does the hurt ever go away?
I wish I could say yes. But it will get better in time. For you. That I promise.
Now, I know that was a bit of a downer ending for a video that is otherwise meant to be positive, but it was something I felt it was important to do. So yeah, that's really all I have to talk about with this video. There was a lot to talk about, and it's been a long time in the making, and I'm really glad to be done with it. So, I want y'all to comment below. What were things that you liked in 2022? And I know we've already gone through 2023 at this point, but... Or if there were things in 2022, new and old, that you liked, please comment below. And thank you for watching.
No, I'm not the enemy. The enemy. I'll take care of you if you'll take care of me. We're walking up in line, and that line ain't free. When push comes to shove, will you show me I'm not the enemy? I'm not the enemy. So step aside if you really can't see. I'm just that's not the way. And I can make you fade away, so I'll just step away. Misplaced, disgraced, I can't seem to find my way. The hate, distaste, the hate, distaste, that's not the way.